Let us travel together to Gravity Falls during the hidden years of the Pines brothers. In Gravity Falls, Oregon, on a summer night in 2012, a concealed machine beneath the Mystery Shack opens, and Stanford Pines steps back into the world. The event brings to light the long history of two brothers whose childhood partnership, scientific ambition, and silence shaped the strange town above them. In Piedmont, Oregon, during the childhood of Stanley and Stanford Pines, you stand before a boarded-up cave beneath the pines. The wooden barricade is rough beneath your fingertips, its boards darkened by rain and age, while thin pine shadows lie across the entrance like narrow bars. Dust rests along the stones, disturbed only by the faint scrape of shoes on the ground. Stanley Pines leans close to the boards, already searching for a weakness. Stanford kneels beside him, studying the nails, hinges, and narrow spaces where daylight enters. The twins share the surname Pines and move with the quiet certainty of a single team. Stanley is broader in his movements, restless and physical, carrying a stick that has become a sword, a lever, and perhaps a key. Stanford holds a small notebook beneath one arm, its pages filled with careful marks and questions. Around you, summer heat gathers among the trees. Sap sweetens the air. Somewhere above the cave, a bird gives one brief note, then falls silent. Stanley presses his shoulder against the barricade, testing the wood with impatient strength. Stanford catches his sleeve before the boards can crack loudly, then points towards a loose stone near the entrance. The gesture is enough. Stanley understands. He crouches. Stanford kneels beside him, and together they lift the stone from the dust. A dark opening waits beneath it. No treasure appears immediately. There is only a narrow passage descending into the earth, with roots threading across its ceiling and small stones gathered in the hollows. Stanley smiles, as if the cave has offered him a private challenge. Stanford's expression is quieter, but his attention has sharpened. Every mark on the wall matters. Every fallen pebble may explain how the passage was sealed. You follow them into the coolness below the trees, where the air changes against your face. Dust lifts from the cave floor in pale clouds around your shoes. The smell is mineral and damp, touched by old wood and the faint green scent of roots. Behind you, the rough barricade remains in the sunlight, crossed by pine shadows. Ahead, the brothers move shoulder to shoulder, whispering about what might lie beyond the darkness. This is the opening flashback of A Tale of Two Stands, the 12th episode of the second season of Gravity Falls. The episode first aired in the United States on 13 July 2015, yet its first important movement reaches much further back, into the childhood of Stanley and Stanford Pines. Before the strange events of the series, before scientific work and distance, and before a painful disagreement could divide them, you find the brothers here, young and inseparable. Stanley taps the wall with his stick, listening for hollowness. Stanford records the sound in his notebook. They have already developed a private language for the unexplained, made from glances, gestures, and unfinished sentences. A strange footprint needs no explanation between them. A locked door is not merely a door. A mark scratched into stone is an invitation. Stanley notices movement first, a pale moth rising from a crack near the ceiling. Stanford follows its path and discovers a second opening behind a hanging curtain of roots. The passage is too narrow for comfort, but Stanley enters without hesitation. His hands brush the stone. His knees gather dust. Stanford follows, carrying the notebook high enough to keep it clean. Their discoveries are rarely large. A rusted tin, a bone, a faded piece of rope, or a cluster of unusual mushrooms can occupy them for an entire afternoon. Yet each object seems to enlarge the world around them. You watch Stanley invent bold explanations, while Stanford quietly tests them. Stanley speaks of buried rooms and hidden machines. Stanford wonders about water levels, geological pressure, and the age of the stone. In that dim corridor, their difference does not separate them. It gives their adventure two directions. The cave narrows, and the twins must turn sideways to pass between the walls. Cold stone presses against your shoulders. Fine grit slips beneath your palms. The faint scrape of shoes on stone travels ahead and returns as a soft echo, making the passage seem longer than it is. Stanley's breathing is quick with excitement. Stanford's pencil moves in short, careful strokes whenever the space widens enough for him to write. A small pool gathers beneath a crack in the ceiling. Its surface trembles whenever someone moves nearby. Stanley drops a pebble into the water and counts the seconds before the sound reaches the bottom. Stanford counts as well, then repeats the experiment from another angle. Their voices remain low, as though the cave itself is listening. Above the earth, summer light continues across Piedmont. Beneath it, the brothers construct a world from fragments. The twins grow through childhood as a single team. Their clothes change, their voices deepen, and the objects in their pockets become more complicated, but the pattern remains familiar. When one discovers something unusual, the other is summoned. When one makes a plan, the other supplies either courage or correction. Stanley is eager for excitement. He climbs fences, crosses streams, and accepts every dare before the words have fully left another child's mouth. He is impulsive, physical, and drawn towards the immediate thrill of action. Stanford is studious and inventive, often pausing where Stanley rushes forward. His curiosity is intense enough to make ordinary things appear mysterious. A broken watch becomes a puzzle. A radio with a damaged aerial becomes a possible source of messages. A peculiar cloud formation becomes evidence that the sky may be concealing a pattern. Their private language grows with them, spoken in objects, theories, and shared looks across crowded rooms. At school, Stanford's unusually gifted mind begins to become apparent. You see him sitting near a window in a warm classroom, surrounded by paper and pencil graphite, while the teacher writes figures across a blackboard. Other pupils shift in their seats. Stanford continues working. He notices relationships between numbers before they have been explained and asks questions that require the adults to search for answers. Stanley sits nearby, less comfortable with lessons and more comfortable with movement. His desk bears small scratches from restless fingers. His papers are uneven, sometimes unfinished, and often marked with drawings of boats, machines, and distant roads. Even then, he listens when Stanford speaks. The schoolroom may not reward Stanley's strength, but Stanford's excitement is enough to hold his attention. Summer heat presses through the open windows. The room smells of paper, pencil graphite, dust, and varnished wood. You hear a fan turning slowly overhead, its blades making a patient, rhythmic sound. Beyond the glass, the shadows of trees lie over the playground. A single insect taps against the window, then drifts away. Stanford fills the margins of his schoolwork with diagrams. Stanley leans across to examine them, asking whether the shapes are maps or machines. Stanford explains what he has imagined, and Stanley listens with complete seriousness. When the explanation becomes too complex, Stanley gives it a simpler name. The name often stays. Their futures begin to show different outlines, though neither brother recognizes the distance yet. Stanford's talent draws him towards formal science. Teachers notice his ability. Letters arrive from institutions farther away. Conversations begin about laboratories, scholarships, competitions, and the unusual possibilities contained within his mind. Stanford studies harder, not because his brother has become less important, but because the world seems to be opening a door. Stanley remains loyal to Stanford's ambitions even when academic success does not come easily to him. He carries books, repairs loose straps, waits outside classrooms, and celebrates every small victory as though it belongs equally to both of them. When Stanford speaks about advanced experiments, Stanley imagines the tools. When Stanford describes distant universities, Stanley imagines the roads leading there. You are standing with them beside a fence at the end of a long school day. The sun has lowered behind the houses. Chalk dust clings to Stanford's sleeve. Stanley has a scrape across one knuckle from climbing where he was not meant to climb. Neither brother seems troubled by the difference. Stanford talks about the future in precise terms. Stanley answers with a grin and a promise to come along. The promise is simple. Their future will involve adventure together. They imagine laboratories hidden in forests, ships crossing dark water, forgotten ruins beneath cities, and machines capable of measuring the invisible. They imagine themselves older, but still moving side by side, Stanford making sense of the unknown and Stanley opening the next door. In their minds, discovery is not solitary. It is something shared between two people who know one another's habits, fears, and small triumphs. Stanley may not understand every equation, but he understands Stanford. He knows when the silence means concentration and when it means disappointment. He knows how Stanford taps a pencil against his teeth while thinking. Stanford knows that Stanley's bravado often hides uncertainty and that a careless joke can be a quiet request for reassurance. Their closeness is established long before the later conflict over Stanford's scientific work. It is built through ordinary hours, not grand declarations. You find it in the way Stanley waits at the edge of a path. You find it in Stanford leaving room beside his notebook. You find it in the unspoken assumption that one brother will always turn back for the other. A breeze passes over the schoolyard, carrying the dry scent of grass and warm dust. The fence is rough under your hand. Small splinters catch in the grain. From an open classroom comes the muted sound of chairs being moved across the floor, followed by a distant voice closing the day's lesson. Stanley and Stanford walk home beneath long evening shadows. Their footsteps fall unevenly, then together. The cave remains part of their private world. They return to the boarded-up entrance with better tools and increasingly elaborate theories. Stanley brings rope, a lantern, and a collection of objects whose uses are not always clear. Stanford brings measuring instruments, folded papers, and careful observations. Their explorations become more methodical without becoming less imaginative. The barricade changes slowly. One board loosens. A nail bends. The opening widens by the thickness of a finger. Each visit brings a small alteration. Dust lifts from the cave floor as they work. The sound of wood against stone travels softly among the trees. Stanley wants to enter immediately. Stanford wants to understand why the boards were placed there. The difference is familiar and harmless. Stanley pushes forward. Stanford asks him to wait. Then Stanford follows. Within the cave, they find no single revelation that explains everything. They find a chamber marked by old scratches, a narrow ledge above dark water, and a metal object partly buried beneath fallen stone. Its surface is cold and strangely smooth. Stanford studies it for a long time. Stanley lifts it free. The object is too heavy for its size. Both brothers hold it together. The world outside is filled with ordinary sounds. A dog barks beyond the trees. A truck passes along the distant road. Wind moves through the pine branches, and the shadows slide across the barricade. Inside, the brothers stare at the unfamiliar object, feeling the old excitement gather between them. Their shared fascination with mysteries and unusual discoveries has become more than a pastime. It has become a way of recognizing one another. Stanford begins to write about the object that evening. He sketches its edges, measures its weight, and lists possible materials. Stanley places it on the kitchen table and makes suggestions that are half practical and half fantastical. Perhaps it belongs to a machine. Perhaps it fell from somewhere beyond the sky. Perhaps someone made it and then decided that no one should find it. Stanford does not dismiss the idea. He adds it to the page. The Pines household grows quiet around them. Dishes are washed. Doors close. The evening darkens beyond the windows. Stanford's pencil continues moving, and Stanley remains beside him, resting his chin in one hand. Their investigation has no deadline. Nothing requires them to finish before sleep. The lamplight makes a pale circle over the table. Pencil graphite gathers in soft smudges near Stanford's wrist. The paper feels dry and slightly rough beneath your fingers. A cooling breeze enters through the window, lifting one corner of a page before Stanley gently places a hand upon it. In the stillness, the brother's future seems close enough to touch. Stanford's abilities carry him further through school. He receives recognition that confirms what he and Stanley have long suspected. His mind moves quickly, inventively, and with unusual depth. Problems that seem closed to others become openings for him. He begins to think in systems, structures, and possibilities extending beyond the ordinary classroom. Stanley watches with pride. He does not always understand the work, but he understands its importance. He knows that Stanford has found a road suited to him, and he wants his brother to travel it. Support comes from Stanley in practical forms, through encouragement, companionship, and an unwavering readiness to stand nearby. Yet the first small divergence is already visible. Stanford begins to imagine an adventure guided by scientific discovery. Stanley imagines one guided by movement, chance, and courage. One brother looks towards instruments and equations. The other looks towards open roads and locked doors. Their shared dream remains, but its details begin to change. You stand in the doorway of a room filled with late afternoon light. Stanford's papers cover the desk. Stanley's jacket hangs over a chair, carrying the smell of dust and outdoor air. On the wall, a map has been marked with pins and pencil lines. The brothers occupy the same room, though their attention has begun to travel in different directions. Outside, rain starts softly against the glass. Neither brother treats the difference as a threat. Stanley still asks where Stanford is going. Stanford still explains what he has discovered. Their conversations remain easy because trust has been laid down over many years, like a path worn into the ground by repeated footsteps. That is why the later separation becomes painful. The memory of being inseparable does not vanish when the brothers begin to diverge. It remains present in every silence, every unfinished explanation, and every place where one expects the other to stand. The boy who once followed Stanley into a narrow cave is still part of Stanford's imagination. The boy who once waited beside Stanford's school desk is still part of Stanley's. Before conflict arrives, there is devotion. Before distance, there is habit. Before scientific work places new pressures upon their lives, there are two boys beneath the pines, carrying one mysterious object between them. The room grows dim. Rain moves over the roof in a steady hush. The old map hangs quietly on the wall. A pencil lies beside the notebook, its point worn smooth from use. Stanley's jacket rests over the chair, heavy with the dampness of evening. You can almost hear the cave again. A shoe brushing stone. A board shifting against its nail. Dust settling in the dark. The brothers stand close together, and the future is still one road. The air is cool beneath the trees. Pine shadows gather over the wooden barricade. Far away, the schoolroom waits with its paper and graphite, its summer heat fading into night. Stanley looks towards the opening. Stanford holds the lantern. For a little while, neither moves. Then Stanford lowers the lantern and turns towards the path leading back through the trees. You follow them into the cool night, where pine shadows gather between the trunks and the ground give softly beneath their shoes. The schoolhouse waits beyond the hillside, holding its paper, graphite, and summer heat within walls that have begun to release the warmth of day. Stanford speaks of the fair as they walk, describing the judges, the visitors, and the university men who may come to see his invention. His voice carries the measured confidence of someone who has already arranged the future in his mind. Stanley listens beside him, carrying the tools and promising to help with whatever remains unfinished. At that hour, the promise seems ordinary, almost weightless, because the brothers have made such promises many times before. You move with them through the trees, beneath branches that catch the last dim color of evening and turn it into broken strips of gray. The air has cooled along the path, yet the scent of warm earth remains between the roots. Pine needles lie in soft layers, giving a faint hush beneath each step, while small insects move unseen through the undergrowth. The lantern throws a narrow circle ahead, revealing stones, roots, and the pale edges of fallen branches. Beyond that circle, darkness gathers without urgency. Now and then, a breeze passes through the upper branches, producing a long, distant murmur that fades before it reaches the ground. Stanley's tools touch one another inside the canvas bag. The sound is gentle and irregular, like small pieces of metal settling in a drawer. Above the trees, the first stars appear over Gravity Falls, faintly visible through the thin veil of evening cloud. The town rests below, its windows beginning to shine one by one. Somewhere there, the school gymnasium has been prepared for the science fair. Tables have been arranged beneath bright artificial lights, and sheets of colored paper have been fixed to boards along the walls. Stanford has spent weeks preparing his invention for that room. He has measured each component, copied every calculation, and tested every connection until the device answers his hands with a steady electric hum. You can picture the machine waiting beneath its cloth, its wires coiled neatly, its metal frame polished where fingers have touched it. Stanford has built something advanced for a school science fair, something more intricate than the projects surrounding it. Its purpose is difficult to explain in a single sentence, and its appearance suggests a future that has arrived early. The invention is not merely a collection of wires and borrowed parts. It is a compact arrangement of coils, switches, glass, and carefully shaped metal, built according to Stanford's private understanding of how the world might be opened. He believes the judges will recognize its significance. More importantly, he believes someone from a prestigious university may recognize it as well. You are standing in the school gymnasium before the doors open, beneath rows of fluorescent tubes that make every surface appear pale and exact. The floor has been polished unevenly, so that the light breaks into long, dull reflections beneath the tables. A faint smell of solder hangs near Stanford's display, mingling with hot metal, scorched dust, cardboard, and the waxy odor of freshly printed labels. The homemade machine rests beneath a dark cloth, while slender wires emerge at the edges like roots searching for soil. Nearby, other students arrange baking soda volcanoes, painted solar systems, paper bridges, and jars filled with cloudy liquid. Their voices drift across the gymnasium in low fragments, never quite becoming loud enough to disturb the careful stillness. Stanley moves around Stanford's table with a box of screws balanced in both hands. He straightens the display card, checks the extension cord, and wipes a smudge from the metal casing with his sleeve. Stanford watches each movement, not with suspicion, but with the concentration of someone protecting a delicate thought. The machine gives a low electric hum whenever current passes through its inner coils. That sound disappears beneath the shuffling of feet, then returns during the quieter pauses. A teacher carries a stack of numbered cards past the entrance. The judges have not yet arrived, and the gymnasium remains filled with anticipation that has nowhere to settle. Stanford tells Stanley that the invention must be demonstrated only once the university representative reaches the table. He speaks calmly, explaining which switch should be touched and which cable must remain undisturbed. Stanley nods, repeating the instructions carefully. He has helped with the project from the beginning, sanding the wooden base, holding wires steady, and finding replacement parts when the first ones failed. Their work has given the brothers a shared rhythm. Stanford has supplied the vision, while Stanley has supplied patience, strength, and the practical assistance that turns an idea into a working object. You are beside them in the narrow workshop behind the house, where the invention has taken shape under a hanging bulb. The room is crowded with spools of copper wire, empty tins, screwdrivers, folded diagrams, and pieces of wood marked with pencil lines. A portable fan turns slowly near the window, moving the smell of solder and hot metal through the warm air. The machine's electric hum fills the pauses between their voices. It is a small sound, but the brothers have grown accustomed to it, and its absence now seems almost unnatural. Stanford leans over the open casing with painstaking confidence. His fingers are thin and deliberate, placing each component according to a diagram covered with corrections and narrow notes. He has written dates beside several tests, including the latest one, which succeeded after midnight beneath the yellow workshop light. Stanley holds a lamp over the mechanism while Stanford tightens a terminal. The light catches the copper coil, the bright head of a screw, and a small bead of solder cooling beside the circuit board. Stanford explains that the invention may attract attention beyond the school. He describes laboratories, scholarships, and rooms where people will have the time and equipment to continue his work. The words are ambitious, yet they do not sound foolish while he speaks them there. Stanley hears a future in his brother's voice and tries to make room for it. He imagines the two of them working together, Stanford designing and Stanley building, until the small machine grows into something too important to fit inside their house. That shared future is never formally promised, but it settles between them as though it has been agreed. The night before the fair, rain begins against the workshop window. It falls lightly at first, then thickens into a steady tapping that obscures the sounds of the town. Stanford remains at the table, making final adjustments beneath the lamp. His notes are arranged in precise rows, and every tool appears to have a proper place. Stanley brings him a cup of water and asks whether anything still needs to be done. Stanford says the invention is ready. He touches the casing with a careful hand, as though the device were both machine and living proof. The room smells of scorched dust and fresh-cut wood. Rainwater slides down the glass in crooked lines, carrying the reflected lamp into trembling shapes. For several minutes, the only voices are those of the brothers, speaking quietly over the electric hum. Stanford describes the moment when the university representative will stop at their table. He imagines questions about the design, the power source, and the principle that allows the machine to produce its unusual effect. Stanley imagines standing nearby while strangers finally understand what his brother has made. The thought pleases him, even though the invention belongs to Stanford's mind more than to his own hands. Before they leave, Stanford covers the machine and places a small wooden barrier around its table. He tells Stanley that the display must remain untouched until morning. Stanley agrees, and the agreement feels as solid as the work itself. You are standing in the workshop doorway while the rain moves over the roof. Behind you, the house has gone quiet. The room holds the warm odor of metal, oil, wet wood, and dust heated by the lamp. On the table, a fine line of smoke rises from a soldering iron left in its stand. The machine has been switched off, yet the sound of its electric hum seems to remain in the walls. A loose wire gives a small metallic tick as the cooling parts contract. Water gathers beneath the window frame and drops into a shallow dish. The lamp draws moths towards its glass, where their wings make brief, papery shadows. Stanley looks back at the covered invention. The cloth has been folded neatly around its corners, and a handwritten label rests against the wooden base. The label bears Stanford's name. Stanley's own name does not appear, although the omission seems unimportant at the time. He knows the invention is Stanford's. He knows that helping does not make the idea his. What he does not know is how easily a shared project can become the boundary between two separate lives. Morning arrives beneath a sky washed clean by rain. The brothers carry the invention from the house to the school, moving slowly along the damp pavement. Stanford holds the central frame. Stanley carries the battery case, the toolbox, and a bundle of replacement wires wrapped in cloth. They reach the gymnasium before most of the other students. Inside, the artificial lights are already burning, bright and tireless above the polished floor. The room feels larger than it did the previous afternoon. Tables stand in orderly rows, and the empty spaces between them invite strangers to pass through. Stanford places the machine at the center of his display. Stanley connects the power cable while Stanford checks the terminals. The device responds with its familiar electric hum. A small indicator light glows blue beneath the casing. Stanford smiles with quiet relief. For a few minutes, their work seems complete. Then another student backs into the edge of the table. Stanley reaches out to steady the display board. His elbow catches the cloth covering the invention, and the fabric pulls against a cable that has not yet been secured. The machine shifts. Stanley grabs for the frame. His fingers press against a delicate panel, and the whole arrangement tips sharply towards the floor. The sound that follows is brief and terrible. Glass breaks against the gymnasium boards. Metal strikes wood. The electric hum rises into a thin, strained whine, and then disappears. You are beneath the bright artificial lights when the machine falls. The gymnasium seems to hold its breath around the scattered pieces. A small coil rolls across the floor and stops beside a table leg. Fragments of glass glint among the dust. The blue indicator light flickers once, twice, and goes dark. Stanley kneels immediately, gathering the loose components with shaking hands. His palm brushes a smear of solder that has cooled into a sharp grey ridge. Stanford remains standing for several seconds. The color drains from his face as he studies the broken casing, the bent frame, and the cable torn from its connection. Around you, the fair continues to gather itself. Voices rise near the entrance. Shoes move across the floor. A teacher calls for students to remain beside their project. The ordinary sounds of the morning make the damaged invention appear even more exposed. Stanley says that it can be repaired. He says there is another coil at home, and that the glass panel may be replaced if they work quickly. Stanford does not answer at first. His attention has moved beyond the machine towards the doors of the gymnasium and the person who may soon enter through them. The university representative is expected before noon. Stanford has built the project for that arrival. He has imagined the questions, the demonstration, and the expression of recognition that might follow. Now the machine lies open beneath the lights, unable to perform as planned. Stanley continues to collect the pieces. His hands are careful, but the broken glass cuts one finger and leaves a small red mark against the dust. Stanford sees the blood and then looks away. The judges begin their first round. Students explain their experiments beside colored posters and handwritten diagrams. A teacher approaches Stanford's table and asks whether the machine is ready for demonstration. Stanford says there has been an accident. His voice is controlled, though something hard has entered it. The teacher examines the damaged equipment and suggests that he present the theory instead. Stanford knows that the theory is not enough. The invention was meant to show what it could do. Without the working mechanism, its advanced design becomes a silent arrangement of parts. The opportunity connected to the science fair begins to recede. You stand beside the table while the university representative passes through the gymnasium. He's accompanied by two teachers and a woman carrying a folder. They stop at several displays, asking questions and making notes. The bright artificial lights reflect from the folder's metal clasp. Near Stanford's table, the air smells of solder, hot metal, scorched dust, and the faint rubber scent of overheated cable. The repaired pieces remain arranged beneath a cloth, but the machine cannot be switched on safely. Stanford holds his explanation in his hands like a fragile object. He speaks about the invention's purpose, its construction, and the principle behind the design. The representative listens politely. His eyes move from Stanford's face to the dark casing and then back again. The conversation lasts less than a minute. When the group moves on, Stanford lowers his papers. Stanley stands at the other side of the table, still holding the damaged cable. The representative has not offered a laboratory visit. No invitation has been written in the folder. The possibility Stanford had carried through the rainy night has vanished without any dramatic sound. The argument begins after the gymnasium empties. By late afternoon, the tables have been cleared, the posters removed, and the bright lights switched off one row at a time. Stanford carries the broken machine back to the workshop. Stanley follows with the tools. Neither brother speaks along the road. The rain has left small pools in the pavement, and their reflections break beneath passing shoes. At home, Stanford places the invention upon the table. He removes the cloth and examines every damaged section. Stanley brings the spare parts and sets them beside him. He says again that the machine can be repaired. Stanford tells him that repair is no longer the point. The fair is over. The representative has gone. The opportunity was connected to that day, that display, and that single demonstration. Stanley says he did not mean to pull the cable. Stanford replies that meaning does not change what happened. The workshop that once held collaboration begins to fill with accusation. You are seated near the work table while the afternoon light fades behind the rain-marked window. The lamp has been switched on, casting a narrow yellow pool over the broken invention. Outside, water drips from the eaves with patient regularity. Inside, the smell of solder has settled into the wood, mingling with hot metal and the dry bitterness of scorched dust. Stanley's cut finger is wrapped in a strip of cloth. A small dark mark has spread through the fabric. Stanford moves the broken coil aside and places his notes into a neat stack. The familiar electric hum is absent. In its place, the room contains the soft scrape of paper, the creak of a chair, and the occasional knock of metal against metal. Stanley looks at the diagrams and remembers holding the lamp. He remembers finding the wire. He remembers the future that seemed to belong to both of them. Stanford looks at the same papers and sees weeks of preparation collapsing into one careless movement. Their memories occupy the same room, yet they no longer join together. Stanford blames Stanley for costing him the opportunity he had expected. He says the university might have changed everything. He says the project could have opened a different life. He says Stanley was asked to help, not to interfere. Stanley listens until the words become heavier than the machine. Then he says that he helped every day. He says that the invention would never have stood on the table without his work. Stanford answers that nobody came to see Stanley's work. The sentence settles between them with a force greater than either brother expects. Stanley feels rejected by the brother whose dream he had tried to support. The rejection is not expressed as a simple refusal. It takes the form of every tool placed out of his reach, every calculation that no longer includes him, and every future sentence spoken in the singular. Stanford gathers the machine's important parts into a wooden box. He does not ask Stanley to hold the lamp. The partnership that had grown through shared labor changes into resentment. You remain in the workshop as the evening deepens around the house. The rain has stopped, but droplets continue to fall from the roof and strike the ground below. A draft enters through the window and passes over the table, lifting the corner of a diagram. The lamp flame bends slightly before becoming still again. Metal surfaces lose their warmth beneath the cooling air. The broken machine rests without movement, its coils dark, its glass scattered in a shallow tray. A screwdriver lies beside the box, reflecting one thin line of light. Stanley's cloth bandage has begun to loosen. He presses it closed with his thumb while Stanford folds a page of notes into quarters. The room carries traces of their earlier cooperation. A pencil mark crosses the wall where a measurement was made. Two chairs remain angled towards the same table. A cup stands near the soldering iron with a pale ring left by water. These ordinary objects preserve the shape of a partnership that has already disappeared. Stanford says he will leave. He says there are places elsewhere where his work may be understood. The words sound prepared, as though they have been waiting behind the argument. Stanley asks where he intends to go. Stanford names no town at first. He speaks instead of laboratories. universities, distant cities, and rooms where invention will matter more than family history. His ambition has become the only clear direction available to him. Stanley hears the departure as another accusation. If Stanford leaves because of the broken machine, then the empty house will become Stanley's fault as well. If Stanford leaves for his work, then Stanley will remain behind with everything that could not be repaired. The brothers argue late into the night. Their voices travel through the house and fall silent whenever footsteps approach. No parent enters to settle the matter. No simple apology can reach the place where the argument has gone. Stanford believes the future was taken from him. Stanley believes the future was shared, and that Stanford has taken it away. Both brothers hold a form of truth. Neither truth is large enough to contain the other. Near midnight, Stanford packs his tools, papers, and remaining components into a case. He leaves the damaged invention behind. Stanley watches from the doorway as his brother carries the case across the hall. The door to Stanford's bedroom remains open while the room is emptied of its most important objects. Books disappear into a satchel. Diagrams are folded and placed between shirts. A small metal instrument is wrapped in cloth. The bed is left unmade. The wall above the desk shows a clean rectangle where a diagram has been pinned for many months. You stand in the bedroom after Stanford has closed the door. The room is suddenly larger, although nothing has been removed from the walls. A faint rectangle of light lies beneath the door and narrows as footsteps move away down the hall. The air holds the dry smell of paper, wool, and old wood. An empty shelf carries a line of dust where the books once stood. The window reflects the room back to itself, showing the bed, the desk, and the dark shape of the chair. From outside comes the distant sound of a vehicle passing along the road. Its noise fades gradually, leaving the house with its own small creaks. The electric hum from the workshop cannot be heard here. Even so, you remember its rhythm, low and steady beneath the brothers' voices. A door closes somewhere beyond the hall. Stanley remains beside the bed, listening to the silence that follows. Stanford leaves home to pursue his work elsewhere. The departure does not resemble a triumphant beginning. He carries ambition with him, but also anger, disappointment, and the belief that the person closest to him has failed him. Stanley is left without the shared future he expected. The house contains the same rooms, the same furniture, and the same narrow windows, yet its arrangement has become unfamiliar. He returns to the workshop and finds the machine waiting beneath the lamp. The broken invention has no use now except as evidence. Each damaged part seems to preserve the instant when Stanley's help became a mistake. He tries to repair the cable. He replaces the coil. He cleans the dust from the casing and fits a temporary pane over the empty space. When he connects the power, the machine answers with a weak sputter and then falls quiet. Stanley turns the switch again. Nothing happens. He sits alone beside the table until the lamp begins to dim. Guilt remains first. It rests heavily in his chest, returning him to the gymnasium and the sudden fall of glass. Then anger appears beneath it. He remembers the hours he spent helping. He remembers Stanford's confidence when the machine first worked. He remembers being treated as though his hands had never belonged near the project. Guilt and anger settle beside one another, neither willing to leave. Stanley has no clear place to go. Stanford's direction is distant and certain. However uncertain its result may be. Stanley remains in the house with the damaged invention and the empty bedroom. You are standing at the workshop table before dawn. The sky beyond the window has turned from black to a thin grey. A cold line of air enters through the frame and moves across your face. The lamp gives a faint electrical buzz, while the abandoned machine sits beneath it with its casing removed. A few strands of copper wire curl across the tabletop. Their surfaces catch the first light and then lose it as the morning cloud thickens. The smell of solder has faded, but scorched dust still clings to the wooden base. On the floor, a fragment of glass lies near the leg of Stanley's chair. It holds a small reflection of the window. Outside, the town is beginning to wake. A cart moves along the road. A bird calls once from the trees. Water slips from the gutter and strikes the stone below in a slow, repeating pattern. Inside the bedroom, the door has closed. The empty room keeps its silence. Stanley places the repaired cable into the wooden box. He does not throw the invention away. He cannot forgive it, and he cannot abandon it. The machine is tied to Stanford's departure, yet it is also tied to the time before it, when the brothers worked side by side beneath the same lamp. The object becomes a container for both memories. Stanford's name remains on the label. Stanley's hands remain in the construction. Neither fact can be removed without changing what happened. Years pass before the story is told again. The science fair incident is revealed in A Tale of Two Stans. An episode aired on 13 July 2015. Within that story, the old room, the broken invention, and the departing brother return as pieces of a larger history. The event is presented as the origin of the brothers' long estrangement. The argument does not vanish with time. It becomes a line drawn through their lives, separating the years before the fair from everything that follows. The tale does not treat the conflict as a simple victory for one brother. It presents a family tragedy in which ambition, accident, loyalty, and wounded pride remain tangled together. Stanford loses the opportunity connected to the science fair. Stanley loses the brother whose dream he had tried to support. The facts remain simple when spoken separately. Together, they form the shape of a wound. You are in the old house after many years, where dust has softened the edges of the furniture and the air has lost the sharpness of fresh solder. The workshop is darker now. The window has been repaired, but its glass carries faint marks from weather and age. The work table has been cleared of most tools. Only a few screws, a blunt pencil, and a shallow tray remain near the wall. Light enters in a thin grey band and rests upon the floorboards. The empty bedroom beyond the hall seems to hold a different temperature from the rest of the house. Its door has closed, and the room behind it contains no movement. A small draft passes under the threshold. The boards answer with a low creak as the house settles. In the distance, the town continues its ordinary life. A bell sounds from the school. A vehicle moves over wet pavement. Somewhere, a machine begins to run, producing a low mechanical vibration that resembles the old electric hum. Memory makes the sound difficult to place. On the table, Stanford's name is still visible on the faded label. Stanley returns to the science fair in memory whenever he touches the box. He sees the bright artificial lights. He sees the cable lifting from the table. He sees the broken glass moving across the floor. He hears Stanford say that the opportunity might have changed everything. The sentence remains intact after every retelling. Stanley also remembers what came before it. He remembers holding the lamp while Stanford worked. He remembers searching for parts in drawers and cupboards. He remembers Stanford speaking of laboratories, scholarships, and a future that appeared to contain them both. That earlier memory refuses to disappear beneath the accusation. It remains beside the accident as the useful work remains beside the damage. Stanford carries a different version of the same day. He remembers the invention functioning beneath the workshop lamp. He remembers the university representative approaching the table. He remembers the certainty that the machine would speak for him when words were not enough. Then he remembers the silence after the electric hum stopped. For Stanford, the broken promise is not only Stanley's promise to be careful. It is the larger promise made by preparation itself, the belief that careful work must eventually be rewarded. The science fair teaches him that effort can be interrupted by a moment no one intended. He chooses to answer that lesson by leaving. His ambition becomes a road away from the room where the machine failed. You are passing through the school gymnasium after the fair has ended. The tables have been folded and stored against the walls. Paper labels cling to the floor where tape has not yet been removed. A few scraps of colored card rest beneath the benches. The artificial lights remain on, though there is no audience left to illuminate. Their brightness has a flat, almost weightless quality. Dust is visible in the air above the polished boards. It moves slowly through the light and gathers along the edges of the room. The smell of hot metal has disappeared, replaced by varnish, old paper, and damp coats. A loose cable hangs from one wall and touches the floor in a curved black line. When the ventilation system starts, the cable shifts slightly. The sound resembles a distant electric hum, steady enough to seem part of the building. At the far end, a display board has been left facing the wall. Its blank wooden back receives a pale reflection from the overhead tubes. The gymnasium contains no trace of the university visitor. There is no folder, no note, and no sign that Stanford's invention was ever placed beneath those lights. Only memory gives the empty room a center. The story of Stanford and Stanley is not the story of a brilliant brother defeating a foolish one. It is the story of two brothers whose abilities once fitted together. Stanford could imagine an advanced invention. Stanley could help bring its parts into place. One brother carried the design, while the other carried the work. Their partnership was real because both needed something from the other. The accident does not prove that Stanley was careless by nature. Nor does Stanford's departure prove that his ambition was without value. The tragedy lies in the narrow space between intention and consequence. Stanley tries to help. His help causes disastrous damage. Stanford loses the moment for which he has prepared. The brothers argue over Stanley's mistake. Stanley feels rejected by the brother he had supported. The argument changes their relationship from partnership to resentment. When Stanford leaves home, Stanley is left without the shared future he expected. No judge can restore the morning. No repaired machine can make the university representative return. The opportunity belongs to the past, and the past has closed around it. You are back in the workshop, where the morning light has become softer and the house has warmed. The machine remains quiet inside its wooden box. The lid is not completely closed, so a narrow gap shows the edge of the metal casing. Dust is gathered there in a pale line. A strand of cobweb connects the box to the wall. Near the window, the old soldering iron rests in its stand, cold and dark. The room smells of dry timber, faint oil, and the mineral trace left by rain. No electric current travels through the invention now. Even so, the memory of its hum seems to vibrate beneath the silence. Stanley's chair faces the table. Stanford's chair stands a little farther away, angled towards the door. Between them lies the cleared space where tools once passed from one pair of hands to another. The floorboards preserve shallow marks from years of movement. A drawer remains partly open, showing screws, washers, and a length of blue wire. Along the wall, the lamp casts a muted oval of light. Beyond that oval, the corners of the workshop become indistinct. Stanley has not found a clear place to go. He works where he can, repairs what comes to hand, and carries the old argument through the ordinary hours. Stanford continues elsewhere, pursuing the work that once filled the workshop with sound. The brothers' lives move apart, yet each remains tied to the same science fair morning. The invention becomes a quiet border between them. On one side stands Stanford, carrying the ambition that led him away. On the other stands Stanley, carrying the guilt that kept him near the empty room. Both remember the project as a promise. Both remember it as a failure. Both understand that the accident changed more than a machine. It changed the meaning of help. It changed the meaning of family. It changed the direction of two lives that had once seemed to share one road. The date remains within the later account, 13 July 2015. The title remains, A Tale of Two Stands. Yet beneath those clear details lies a quieter truth. A family can divide without either person receiving what they wanted. Stanford does not receive the recognition he expected. Stanley does not receive forgiveness or partnership. The conflict leaves no uncomplicated winner. The science fair incident becomes a family tragedy because love remains present inside the resentment. You are standing once more at the harbor at dawn, where pale light touches the water and the town begins to stir beyond the shore. The air is cool against your face. Ropes creak against wooden posts. Small waves lift and lower the boats with a rhythm too slow to demand attention. A gull passes above the roofs and disappears into the whitening sky. The scent of salt, damp timber, and distant coal smoke rests over the harbor. Somewhere behind the town, a workshop door opens. A machine begins its low electrical vibration. The sound carries faintly through the morning, joining the scrape of carts and the soft knock of cargo being unloaded. In that sound, the old invention seems to return for a moment, not as a triumph, not as a simple failure. It returns as the object around which two brothers once placed their trust. Stanford prepares it with painstaking confidence. Stanley helps him. Stanley damages it by accident. Stanford loses the opportunity connected to the science fair. The brothers argue, and the room fills with accusation. Stanford chooses his ambition and departs. Stanley is left with guilt, anger, and no clear place to go. The future that once appeared to be one road becomes two roads beneath different skies. You remain beside the water while the first sunlight spreads across the harbor. The wooden boards beneath your feet are damp and slightly uneven. A length of rope lies coiled near the edge, its fibers darkened by mist. The tide moves beneath the planks, carrying small pieces of wood past the posts. Far across the water, the opposite shore appears in soft grey layers. Nothing there is sharp enough to hold the mind for long. The morning continues without insisting upon itself. Light rests upon the roofs. Wind passes over the surface of the bay. A distant bell sounds once and then becomes part of the air. The memory of solder and hot metal fades into the cleaner scent of salt. The memory of the electric hum becomes the low movement of water. The memory of the empty bedroom becomes the quiet space between one harbor post and the next. Stanford and Stanley remain separated by the old promise. The promise was never written down, yet it shaped the days that followed. One brother believed the other had broken it. The other believed the first had abandoned it. Neither could return to the moment before the machine fell. You watched the tide move beneath the harbor, carrying the darkness away from the shore. The school, the workshop, and the empty bedroom remain behind you. The bright gymnasium has gone quiet. The broken invention rests in its box. The closed door keeps its silence. Beneath the cool morning air, the story of the two brothers continues, measured by distance, memory, and the faintest remaining trace of an electric hum. The electric hum fades behind you as Stanford leaves the harbor and begins the long road away from home. The morning is pale, and wet stones shine beneath a sky still burdened with rain. You walk beside him through quiet streets, carrying nothing but the knowledge that ordinary life has already fallen out of reach. His childhood home recedes among workshops, schoolrooms, and shuttered windows, while the road bends towards forests and distant towns. Stanford continues his research after leaving home, following questions with no comfortable ending. He carries instruments wrapped in cloth, loose diagrams protected between boards, and a mind crowded with unfinished explanations. The silence between one settlement and the next becomes part of his work. Every mile places him farther from family life, yet closer to the unanswered patterns beginning to govern his thoughts. Rain ticks against the windows of the small rooms where Stanford rests during his travels. Water gathers in narrow lines upon the glass, joining and separating as though following routes of its own. Beside a dim lamp, ink dries slowly beside stacked field notes, its dark surface reflecting the faintest amber glow. The paper smells of dust, fibers, and the sharp mineral scent of damp air. Cold metal instruments lie beneath a work lamp, each carefully wrapped after another night of measurements. A compass trembles near a ruler, although no magnet is placed nearby. Outside, the road is softened by mist, and the forest branches hold beads of water along their slender tips. You remain near the table while Stanford writes, hearing only the quiet scratching of his pen and the delicate tapping of rain. His investigations lead him to Gravity Falls, Oregon, a remote town whose peculiarities exceed its ordinary descriptions. You arrive beneath tall pines, with the road descending into a valley folded between dark ridges. Gravity Falls appears peaceful at first, with modest buildings, quiet porches, and smoke rising from chimneys. Yet impossible events seem almost routine there. Animals behave in ways that resist natural history, shadows move without bodies, and strange figures appear where the forest should be empty. Stanford observes these occurrences without treating them as isolated curiosities. He measures distances, records times, compares witness accounts, and marks each location on a growing map. Gravity Falls is unusually dense with supernatural anomalies, and that density becomes more important than any single creature. The town is no longer merely a place where odd things happen. It becomes a problem with a shape. After dark, the pine forest releases a resinous smell that settles over the roads and damp roofs. The scent is warm beneath the coldness of night, recalling sap, bark, and sunlight stored inside the trees. Around you, branches scrape together high above the ground, producing a dry, irregular whisper. Rainwater falls from the needles in delayed drops, striking leaves, stones, and the shoulders of old wooden fences. The forest floor gives slightly beneath each step, cushioned by moss and fallen cones. Far away, a train horn crosses the valley and loses itself among the hills. Near the edge of town, a porch light glows through curtains of mist, while small moths circle the glass. Stanford walks with his coat drawn close, and darkness gathers quietly around Gravity Falls, Oregon. Stanford records his discoveries in journals, giving each observation a place among the others. You see him divide the pages into careful sections, noting creatures, locations, unexplained phenomena, and the conditions surrounding each event. A footprint beside a stream is measured beside an account of a vanishing cabin. A creature described by frightened witnesses is compared with an unusual disturbance in the local magnetic field. His journal pages document more than monsters. They preserve movements, sounds, symbols, weather patterns, and fragments of testimony that might otherwise disappear. Over time, the notebooks turn scattered mysteries into a growing body of evidence. Stanford becomes the mysterious author associated with the journals later found during the series, although the name on their covers remains hidden from those who read them. The pages carry his mind into the future, long after his footsteps have faded from the forest paths. Inside the laboratory, the pages lie beneath weights while the air dries slowly around them. Ink drying beside stacked field notes leaves a faint scent of iron and oil, mingling with the smell of pine after dark. Rain ticks against the laboratory windows, each sound softened by thick walls and shelves of equipment. A glass vial catches the work lamp and throws a narrow line of green across the table. Cold metal instruments rest in ordered rows, their surfaces marked by fingerprints, scratches, and the dull stains of repeated use. Somewhere beneath the floor, a pipe expands with a quiet knock. The lamp warms one small circle of paper, while the room's corners remain blue and indistinct. You hear Stanford turn one page, then another, as the night gathers weight outside. The more Stanford studies Gravity Falls, the more strongly its separate anomalies resemble parts of one hidden system. You follow him from the shore of a black lake to a clearing where trees grow in a perfect ring. He notices that unusual events cluster along particular lines, as though the land carries a pattern beneath its surface. Symbols recur in places with no visible connection, and disturbances appear near old structures, caves, and abandoned roads. His research leads him to believe that Gravity Falls anomalies have a common source. The idea changes the meaning of every earlier discovery. Each creature may be a consequence rather than a cause, and every inexplicable location may touch the same unseen boundary. Stanford's journals become a map of relationships, not merely a catalogue of wonders. Curiosity begins to acquire the weight of duty. Mist settles between the pines and turns the forest into a sequence of near and distant forms. The closest trunks are black with moisture, while those farther away fade into layers of grey. Resinous air rises from broken branches and wet needles, carrying the deep fragrance of pine after dark. Rain ticks against laboratory windows behind you, steady and patient, even when the clouds have thinned above the valley. A work lamp burns through the glass, illuminating cold metal instruments on a bench. Their edges appear severe and exact, contrasting with the softness of moss along the outer stones. In the silence, a beetle moves beneath a sheet of paper and pauses. The lamp hums, the rain answers, and the forest keeps its own slow record of time. The possibility of another dimension eventually enters Stanford's explanation for gravity falls. You stand beside his desk as he draws lines that pass through the known world and continue beyond the page's margins. He concludes that the source may involve another dimension, a place governed by laws that overlap with his own without obeying them completely. Within the privacy of his notes, the thought becomes a hypothesis requiring instruments, tests, and a machine capable of reaching beyond ordinary space. Stanford decides that observation alone is insufficient. Looking, measuring, and listening can reveal only the effects of the hidden source. To understand the cause, he must attempt contact with the boundary itself. The scale of his research expands from a town to a world, and then to whatever lies beside it. The work lamp leaves a warm circle upon the bench, but the metal beyond it remains cold and colorless. Rain ticks against the laboratory windows in a rhythm resembling a distant clock, marking intervals between calculations. Stacked field notes lean against a jar of brushes, their page edges curling beneath the damp air. A thin thread of pine scent enters whenever the outer door opens, bringing the forest into the room. Glass tubes, copper coils, lenses, and measuring needles occupy every available surface. Their textures vary from smooth and polished to roughened by use. You pass your hand near the instruments without touching them, feeling the faint warmth of the lamp and the chill radiating from the metal. Stanford's diagrams cover the walls like a second, more private architecture. Stanford begins designing a portal between dimensions, transforming the idea into a project of extraordinary complexity. You watch him draft rings, chambers, power systems, and stabilizing mechanisms across sheets covering the floor. The portal requires substantial equipment, much of it too large, delicate, or dangerous to place inside an ordinary house. Cables must be routed through walls, generators concealed, and the machine protected from curious eyes. The design grows taller than a person and broader than a doorway, with a central space reserved for an opening that cannot yet exist. Stanford searches for a suitable place beneath gravity falls, where stone and forest can hide the sound of construction. His research now depends upon secrecy as much as mathematics. The portal changes the scale of his work, and that change begins to alter him. Beneath the earth, the concealed laboratory smells of dust, hot wiring, and damp stone. Rain ticks against windows set high within the walls, making the outside world seem distant and unreachable. A work lamp hangs above a table crowded with blueprints, while cold metal instruments lie beneath its light like sleeping tools. Ink dries beside stacked field notes, and small smudges show where Stanford has moved from calculation to repair. The ceiling carries the faint vibration of machinery running in another chamber. Along the far wall, wooden crates hold components wrapped in canvas and paper. Water glistens in a narrow crack between two stones, gathering before it descends into darkness. You remain among the equipment while the laboratory settles around you, enclosed by rock, timber, and the patient pressure of the forest above. Stanford seeks help from Fiddleford McGucket during the portal's construction. You see Fiddleford enter the concealed laboratory carrying tools, sketches, and the energy of a person who enjoys solving difficult practical problems. His engineering knowledge allows the machine to move from theory towards physical form. Together, the two men assemble supports, test circuits, strengthen housings, and refine Stanford's calculations. Fiddleford asks questions about purpose and safety, while Stanford answers with increasing confidence that the portal can reveal the source of gravity falls anomalies. Their partnership gives the project speed and precision. For a time, the laboratory contains two minds working in concert. Yet the work also creates distance between what Stanford wishes to discover and what Fiddleford believes can safely be built. The laboratory grows warmer near the generators, though the stone walls retain their underground chill. Copper wires carry a faint metallic odor, and heated dust moves in narrow currents above the machinery. Cold metal instruments beneath the work lamp gather tiny beads of condensation where the air changes temperature. Rain ticks against the high windows, mingling with the low pulse of the power system. Ink drying beside stacked field notes leaves the pages fixed open at measurements of voltage, distance, and time. Fiddleford's tools rest beside Stanford's rulers, creating a rough boundary between practical repair and abstract design. Beyond the glass, pine branches bend beneath the weather. The forest's resinous smell reaches the room in thin, intermittent breaths. The research increasingly isolates Stanford from ordinary family life, as the portal demands more hours and greater concealment. You watch him miss meals, postpone visits, and leave familiar correspondence unanswered beneath new diagrams. Those around him sense that part of his attention has moved elsewhere, into the journals and machinery hidden below the ground. Stanford no longer speaks of gravity falls as a place he studies. He speaks of it as a system whose secrets must be unlocked before they shift beyond his reach. Fiddleford continues assisting him, but concern enters the workroom with each new question. Stanford protects the project by withholding its purpose, first from acquaintances, then from friends, and eventually from those closest to him. Curiosity has become a vocation, and then an obsession. The house above the laboratory remains quiet during the late hours. Floorboards cool beneath the fading warmth of the day, and rain touches the roof with soft persistence. Somewhere beyond the walls, the pine forest breathes through dripping branches, releasing its resinous smell into the dark. The hidden rooms below hold a different atmosphere, close with oil, paper, and old stone. A work lamp leaves the corners in shadow, while cold metal instruments gleam beneath its shade. Ink dries beside stacked field notes that have grown into uneven towers. You stand between the ordinary rooms and the concealed passage, hearing faint machinery below and muted rain above. Two worlds occupy the same structure, separated by boards, silence, and Stanford's decisions when no one else is present. Stanford's journal pages become increasingly precise as the portal draws closer to completion. You read descriptions of creatures appearing only under particular conditions, locations that change their arrangement, and unexplained phenomena that seem to follow hidden rules. The journals preserve the shape of his attention, moving from broad descriptions towards exact measurements and repeated trials. Every entry adds another piece to the argument that gravity falls is connected to an external source. He records failures with the same care as discoveries, noting broken components, unstable readings, and moments when the machine responds to no visible cause. The books become evidence of a mind attempting to impose order upon the impossible. They also become a record of solitude, because fewer people remain near Stanford as the work consumes his days and nights. A thin film of dust settles over unused shelves, while active instruments remain bright beneath the lamp. Rain slips down the panes in crooked silver threads. The papers near the table carry the dry smell of repeated handling, mixed with pine air drawn from the forest. Cold metal instruments wait in rows, some marked by fingerprints and others polished, until they reflect only the lamp. A pencil rolls across the desk and comes to rest against a field note. The silence is not empty, because wires vibrate, stones contract, and water moves through hidden cracks. You can feel the laboratory holding its breath around Stanford's work, as though the walls themselves have become part of the experiment. The first journal is eventually hidden outside the main house, where its pages can remain beyond the reach of ordinary visitors. You follow Stanford through wet grass towards a place screened by trees, roots, and uneven darkness beneath the branches. He chooses concealment over convenience, placing the journal where the forest can guard what the house can no longer safely contain. The decision reflects the change that has taken place inside him. His discoveries once belonged to the broad world of inquiry, but they now seem dangerous when exposed to unprepared eyes. The journal carries creatures, locations, and unexplained phenomena into hiding, while the remaining research continues below the concealed laboratory. Stanford understands that the books could reveal the portal, the anomalies, and the source he believes lies beyond another dimension. Protection becomes inseparable from knowledge. Wet earth presses softly beneath your feet near the hidden journal. Pine needles cling to the edges of stones, and the resinous smell of the forest rises from the ground with every movement. Rain reaches the clearing only as a faint suggestion carried through the trees. Bark is rough beneath your palm, ridged by age and darkened by moisture. Small drops gather along spider webs between low branches, trembling when the wind passes. A covered shape rests beneath roots and leaf mold, almost indistinguishable from the natural clutter around it. Night insects continue their quiet work nearby. The forest does not announce what has been placed within it, and the journal becomes another secret held by Gravity Falls. Stanford's belief in a common source leads him deeper into the portal project, even as the machine becomes more difficult to control. You see new calculations spread across the floor, with circles intersecting at angles that make the room appear to turn. He compares readings from the forest with measurements taken near the portal chamber, seeking a correspondence between distant disturbances and local energy. The investigation has passed beyond observation and entered a realm where every test may change the conditions being tested. Fiddleford's reservations grow as the equipment becomes larger, the experiments more severe, and Stanford less willing to pause. The portal is no longer simply a method of learning about another dimension. It has become the center around which Stanford arranges his time, loyalties, and remaining connection to ordinary life. Warm air from the generators rises towards the ceiling, carrying the smell of heated insulation. Below it, the stone remains cool, damp, and faintly metallic. Ink dries beside stacked field notes, with fresh lines crossing older diagrams as Stanford revises his assumptions. Rain ticks against the windows above the equipment, while the work lamp casts narrow brightness over gauges and screws. Cold metal instruments beneath the lamp hold the room's temperature in their surfaces. Through a ventilation grate, the forest enters as a distant mixture of wet bark and pine resin. The sound of a wrench meeting a bolt travels along the walls and fades. You stand beside the portal's unfinished frame, surrounded by textures that are solid, measurable, and unable to explain what the machine is meant to reach. As the concealed laboratory expands, Stanford begins protecting the research by keeping it from everyone around him. You notice how his conversations become shorter whenever the subject turns towards Gravity Falls, Oregon, or the chamber beneath the house. He locks cabinets, removes drawings from shared rooms, and gives harmless explanations for deliveries of unusual equipment. The journals are separated according to their usefulness and danger, with the first one hidden outside the main house. Fiddleford remains involved, yet the partnership is strained by Stanford's certainty and refusal to reveal every concern. The work once connected Stanford to other people through shared curiosity. Now it places barriers between them. His secrecy is intended to preserve the investigation, but it also preserves his isolation. The portal has begun opening a distance before it opens any dimension. The night air rests heavily among the trees, carrying dampness into the folds of your clothing. Ricinus pine scent hangs close to the ground, sharpened by rain and darkness beneath the branches. Far below, the town gives off muted sounds: a door closing, a vehicle passing, a dog shifting behind a fence. In the laboratory, the rain continues its patient conversation with the glass. Cold metal instruments reflect the work lamp in pale fragments, while paper absorbs the yellow light without returning it. Ink darkens beside the stacked field notes as its surface loses its gloss. The hidden journal remains beneath roots, protected by soil, bark, and shadow. Above it, the forest keeps moving gently, while beneath it Stanford continues to build. The events surrounding Stanford's search are explained principally in A Tale of Two Stans, which aired on 13 July 2015. You move through that account as though through a series of rooms, each revealing another part of the distance between the brothers, the research, and the hidden machinery. Stanford arrives in Gravity Falls, records its impossible events, identifies patterns among its anomalies, and begins to suspect another dimension. He designs the portal, seeks help from Fiddleford McGucket, and gradually withdraws from ordinary family life. The first journal is hidden outside the main house, preserving discoveries later associated with the mysterious author of the journals found during the series. The story gathers these details into a quiet explanation of how curiosity changes when it encounters evidence too large to ignore. Stanford's search becomes a life arranged around the unexplained. The laboratory windows are dark mirrors now, showing only the room within. Rain ticks against the glass, and drops gather at the lower frames before slipping into unseen channels. The work lamp burns over cold metal instruments, making each surface appear briefly touched by sunlight. Paper covers the benches, and ink drying beside stacked field notes gives the air a faint, familiar sharpness. From the concealed entrance, the smell of pine forest after dark moves through the room, mingling with dust and machine oil. The floor carries small fragments of wire, wood, and stone, each left where the work interrupted it. You hear no voices above, only rain, the low electrical hum, and the careful turning of pages remain. Stanford's journals endure because they hold both visible evidence and the uncertainty surrounding it. You stand among their imagined pages, where creatures receive names, locations acquire coordinates, and unexplained phenomena are preserved without being forced into convenient answers. Gravity Falls appears again and again, its name repeated beside forests, roads, caves, and buildings marked by unusual activity. Oregon surrounds the town with distance, giving the investigation room to grow beyond the notice of ordinary institutions. Stanford's entries return to the possibility of a common source, then to another dimension, and finally to the portal that might connect them. Each return deepens the pattern rather than resolving it. The notebooks become the quiet architecture of his search, while the mysterious author remains hidden behind the evidence he leaves behind. The pages feel dry and slightly rough beneath your fingers, though the air around them remains moist. Rain ticks against the laboratory windows with a rhythm too soft to disturb the room's concentration. A work lamp warms the paper, but cannot reach the shelves beyond it, where jars and instruments recede into shadow. Cold metal instruments beneath the light carry tiny marks from repeated handling. The smell of pine forest enters through the ventilation system, bringing the remembered texture of wet bark and fallen needles. Dust lies in the corners of the concealed laboratory, undisturbed except where cables cross the floor. The room seems to have no season of its own. Outside, gravity falls changes with the weather, while inside, Stanford's measurements continue through the hours. The scale of Stanford's work has changed permanently by the time the portal stands ready for its next stage. You see the machine occupying the hidden chamber with a presence larger than any ordinary instrument. Its rings, cables, housings, and supports transform the laboratory into a place devoted to one question. The common source he inferred from scattered anomalies now has a possible doorway. Another dimension is no longer an abstract explanation written at the edge of a page. It is a destination suggested by metal, electricity, and carefully arranged geometry. Stanford remains convinced that ordinary observation cannot cross the boundary. His portal is an attempt to replace distance with access. Yet the more completely he protects the project, the less of his former life remains available to him. Near the completed structure, the air tastes faintly of ozone and heated metal. Rain ticks against laboratory windows high above, and the sound seems smaller than the machinery below. The work lamp shines across bolts, seams, and polished edges, revealing the cold texture of every component. Ink dries beside stacked field notes on a nearby table, where calculations wait beneath glass weights. The pine forest lies beyond the walls, its resinous smell entering through the vents in thin waves. A cable trembles against its support and produces a soft, repetitive tap. You feel the floor answer with a barely perceptible vibration. Nothing in the chamber moves without a cause, yet the whole room seems to lean towards the opening Stanford has spent so long imagining. The research leaves Stanford surrounded by knowledge, but increasingly separated from the people who once shared his life. You watch him pass through the house without noticing familiar objects in its rooms. His attention remains fixed upon the hidden laboratory, the journals, and the evidence beneath gravity falls. Family life becomes an interruption measured against experiments, repairs, and calculations. Fiddleford McGucket's presence reminds him that the work began as a partnership, yet Stanford's secrecy makes partnership more difficult at every stage. He keeps the research from everyone around him because he believes such protection is necessary. The hidden first journal, concealed equipment, and locked notes all serve the same purpose. Stanford is preserving the truth, but he's also building a life in which only the truth can remain close. The house grows still around the concealed rooms, while rain continues across the roof and laboratory windows. A faint smell of pine resin travels through the passages whenever the outer doors open, carrying the forest's darkness into the warmer air below. Cold metal instruments beneath the work lamp remain arranged for another examination. Ink drying beside stacked field notes slowly loses its gloss, fixing Stanford's latest conclusions in place. Wooden shelves creak beneath jars, tools, and bound papers. Somewhere outside, water falls from a branch onto a broad leaf with a muted, hollow sound. You stand between the hidden journal and the portal chamber, feeling the quiet pressure of secrets held in separate places. Gravity falls sleeps above its mysteries, and Stanford works beneath them. In the years that follow, Stanford's search gives the journals a significance beyond their original purpose. You encounter their pages as traces of a vanished author, each entry carrying the careful habits of the man who first wrote it. The books document creatures, locations, and unexplained phenomena, but they also preserve the route by which curiosity became obsession. Gravity Falls remains central to the record, and Oregon remains the landscape surrounding its impossible density. Stanford's belief in a common source leads towards another dimension, while the portal represents his refusal to accept the limits of ordinary observation. The first journal, hidden outside the main house, survives as part of that deliberate protection. Its concealment marks the moment when knowledge becomes something Stanford believes must be guarded from everyone around him. The final light of the work lamp rests upon the journal's closed cover. Rain ticks against the laboratory windows, softening the edges of every sound within the chamber. Cold metal instruments beneath the lamp hold a pale sheen, while the ink beside stacked field notes settles into dark, permanent lines. Beyond the walls, the pine forest releases its resinous smell into the night, and wet needles press gently beneath falling water. The portal stands silent, its frame occupying the darkness with patient weight. You remain in the still room as the machinery cools, and the pages lose their warmth. Stanford's work has not explained everything. It has only drawn the unexplained into a clearer pattern, leading from gravity falls to another dimension, and from knowledge towards a door that cannot easily be closed. You stand beside Stanford in a narrow room beneath the house, where floorboards creak above you and the walls carry the faint tremor of hidden machinery. A single lamp rests beside an open notebook, illuminating diagrams of circles, symbols, and impossible angles. Stanford writes the first of 3 journals connected with the portal, recording measurements in a careful hand, while Fiddleford McGucket adjusts the instruments nearby. The work began as an attempt to explain the strange forces gathered around gravity falls, yet every calculation seems to widen the mystery. Stanford's theory suggests that a dimensional source lies beneath the town's ordinary appearance, sending echoes of unnatural energy into the forest, the lake, and the minds of its inhabitants. The portal is intended to reach that source. Beneath the creaking floorboards, the hidden room feels smaller than it did yesterday. Dust gathers along the beams, and fine grains drift down whenever the house settles under its own weight. Oil clings to the edges of metal gears, carrying a dark, familiar scent through the laboratory. Near the far wall, a coil gives off the smell of electrical heat, sharp enough to linger at the back of your throat. Blue-white light gathers around the machinery in quiet pulses, fading whenever the current weakens. A low mechanical vibration travels through the boards beneath your shoes, rising into the structure of the house like a distant engine. Above you, furniture shifts softly as the building cools. Below it, the laboratory continues its patient breathing, sealed away from the road and the surrounding pines. Stanford has already written several pages when he pauses over a diagram of the portal's central ring. You can see the strain in his fingers as he turns the pencil between them, though his expression remains absorbed and deliberate. Fiddleford explains that the current will not sustain the machinery for long because the portal requires fuel or power strong enough to hold the opening in place. Stanford listens, then marks a note beside the calculations. The project has grown beyond a modest experiment. A private scientific investigation is becoming a doorway to somewhere unknown, and Stanford knows that an unfinished doorway may be more dangerous than a completed one. He continues despite the risks, convinced that the source beneath gravity falls can be reached and understood. Warm air gathers around the lamps, but the room remains cold at its edges. Copper wires run across the floor in careful loops, disappearing beneath cabinets and behind wooden supports. Their surfaces gleam faintly whenever the blue-white light strengthens. A shallow tray holds screws, springs, and small brass tools, each coated with a thin residue of oil. Dust lies over the unused equipment, while newer devices stand clean and sharply defined beside it. The low vibration grows heavier when Fiddleford turns a switch, and the house answers with a soft complaint from its beams. Somewhere overhead, rain touches the roof in uneven threads. The sound reaches you through layers of timber, muffled and distant, while electrical heat leaves a metallic dryness in the air. You watch Stanford return to the first journal, filling its pages with information needed to understand and operate the portal. He writes about the sequence of symbols, the required power, and the precise alignment of the machinery beneath the house. He records warnings beside the instructions, although they become more serious with every entry. A portal cannot be treated as a simple passage, because anything that can be opened may also be entered from the other side. Stanford has not yet fully understood the danger represented by Bill Cipher as the project develops. The name appears in his notes as a troubling possibility rather than a complete threat, surrounded by questions about intelligence, persuasion, and dimensional influence. The work proceeds while the meaning of those questions remains hidden. A thin sheen of condensation forms along the laboratory's lower windows, though the room is buried beneath the house. The glass reflects the machinery as broken shapes, and the blue-white light appears there in trembling fragments. You smell dust warmed by lamps, oil rubbed into leather belts, and the dry scent of old paper. The pages of the journal lift slightly whenever the portal's coils discharge, then settle again with a soft whisper. A screwdriver rolls across the table and stops against a wooden block. From above comes the muted groan of a chair being moved across the floor. The house seems to contain two separate lives, one ordinary and quiet overhead, the other concentrated beneath it in metal, paper, and restrained energy. The first journal becomes more than a record of experiments. Stanford understands that it contains the information needed to operate the portal, and he begins to regard the book as a key that must not be left within reach. You stand with him near the workbench while he studies the completed pages, and the low vibration moves through the soles of your feet. He thinks about misuse, about careless hands following instructions without understanding the forces involved. The portal's purpose is connected to his theory about a dimensional source beneath gravity falls, but the same opening might permit something hostile to cross in the opposite direction. He realizes that the journal must eventually be removed from the laboratory. The hidden room grows dim when Stanford lowers the lamps. Machinery remains visible in the fading glow, its edges softened by shadow and dust. Floorboards overhead creak under slow footsteps, and each step sends a faint tremor through the ceiling. Oil-darkened cloths lie folded beside a box of spare parts. A cooling coil clicks at irregular intervals, giving the quiet a measured rhythm. Blue-white light still gathers around the largest ring, though it has become pale and thin. The air smells of warm metal and paper kept too long in a closed room. In the corners, dust rests on the stone like a fine grey powder. The laboratory seems to wait beneath the house, holding its heat close while the forest darkens beyond the walls. Stanford asks Stanley to conceal the first journal. You stand near the kitchen table as the brothers face one another beneath the ordinary lamps of the house, with the laboratory hidden below their feet. Stanford speaks quietly, explaining that the journal must be protected because its instructions could reopen the portal. Stanley hears the request as another demand for secrecy, another part of Stanford's life placed behind a locked door. Yet Stanford continues, asking him to protect the book and the secret even if the work becomes impossible to explain. He does not offer every detail because fear and caution have narrowed his words. The brothers remain close enough to touch, but the journal between them has already become a boundary. Cold air slips through a gap beside the skirting board, carrying the scent of wet soil from beneath the house. The kitchen above the laboratory is plain, with worn wood, a kettle cooling near the stove, and pale dust caught in the corners. Beneath the floor, machinery continues its low vibration, almost too faint to hear. You feel it through the table legs and the soles of your shoes. A loose spoon trembles once, then becomes still. The smell of electrical heat rises through the boards in a thin, dry thread, mingling with old timber and rain-soaked earth. Stanford's journal rests in a leather cover, its surface rough beneath your hand, while the hidden room below remains filled with blue-white reflections. Stanley takes the first journal from Stanford, though he does not yet understand the full weight of what he has agreed to carry. Stanford tells him that the book must be kept far from the laboratory and from anyone who might use its instructions without restraint. You accompany Stanley away from the house and into the surrounding country, where the roads become narrow and the trees close around the path. He chooses a remote location, distant from gravity falls and separated from the portal by miles of forest and silence. There, Stanley hides the journal carefully, placing it where ordinary travelers would have no reason to search. Stanford's request is fulfilled, but the concealment does not settle the tension between the brothers. Pines gather densely around the remote place, their branches crossing overhead in a dark lattice. Damp earth presses beneath your boots, and resinous fragrance hangs in the stillness between the trees. Stanley works without hurry, moving stones aside and brushing leaves from the ground before choosing a concealed space. The journal remains wrapped against moisture, its leather cover protected from mud and rain. A small stream moves somewhere beyond the slope, its sound softened by moss and fallen needles. Wind touches the upper branches, but scarcely reaches the forest floor. The remote location feels removed from the laboratory, the house, and every bright instrument below the creaking boards. Even so, the secret seems to follow you through the trees. Stanford continues working with Fiddleford after the journal has been hidden. You stand inside the house, while the brothers remain separated by distance and uncertainty, and the laboratory receives new coils, new switches, and heavier power systems. Fiddleford assists Stanford with the portal project, bringing practical skill to the dangerous calculations. Together, they refine the frame and search for fuel strong enough to operate it. The machines demand more energy than the house can comfortably provide, and each test leaves Stanford with another reason for caution. His theory about a dimensional source beneath gravity grows more persuasive as the instruments respond. The possibility of discovery draws him forward, even while invasion begins to trouble his thoughts. The laboratory is crowded now, with cables lying in broad loops and metal braces fixed against the stone walls. A scent of oil covers the older smell of dust, while electrical heat gathers around the power equipment in dry waves. Blue-white light moves across the portal frame whenever Fiddleford tests the current, outlining the ring against the dark room. The light fades slowly, leaving afterimages along the edges of the benches. Beneath the house, the low vibration settles into the walls and travels upward through the floorboards. A small fan turns unevenly beside a cabinet, pushing warm air across your face. Every surface carries evidence of use, from finger marks on glass to blackened traces around the switches. You return with Stanford to the pages of the first journal, where diagrams now occupy nearly every available space. The instructions require patience and careful study, and Stanford has written them in a form that conceals as much as it reveals. Symbols explain the sequence of activation, while measurements describe the necessary fuel or power. Notes beside the diagrams warn that the opening may connect with regions beyond ordinary physical space. Stanford has begun to see that knowledge can be dangerous when separated from judgment. The portal was designed to discover the origin of gravity fall's weirdness, yet its function may exceed the purpose that first inspired it. He believes that caution might still contain the consequences. A faint vibration rises from the floor as the portal's power system charges. You hear no sharp alarm, only the subdued turning of relays and the quiet click of metal responding to heat. Dust stirs along the baseboards and settles into new patterns. The blue-white glow gathers around the machinery, brighter near the central ring and softer beneath the benches. Oil shines on a belt that moves with slow precision. Electrical heat leaves the room smelling of copper, dry stone, and warmed insulation. Above you, the house remains dim and still, its ordinary rooms sheltering a laboratory no visitor would suspect. The hidden room holds its own weather, made from current, shadow, and the breath of cooling machinery. Stanford does not fully understand Bill's cipher as the project develops, and the gap in his understanding becomes more dangerous as the portal nears completion. You see the name in the margins of the journal, linked to warnings that Fiddleford finds increasingly difficult to dismiss. Stanford treats the figure as one danger among several, a clever presence associated with a wider dimensional field. His attention remains fixed on the source of the weirdness beneath Gravity Falls. The portal's purpose seems scientific, and the unknown destination appears to promise answers. Yet Stanford has begun to recognize that an intelligence may be waiting beyond the opening. His confidence narrows, and the instructions become guarded, exact, and difficult to interpret without him beside them. The room feels colder whenever the machinery is switched off, as though the heat has been holding the darkness at a distance. A film of dust lies over the unused sections of the floor, untouched except where boots have passed. The smell of oil remains in the timber, and the faint odor of electrical heat clings to the metal ring. You can hear the house settling overhead, beam by beam, while a low vibration continues inside the walls. The blue-white light has vanished, leaving only a dull reflection in the glass instruments. Paper rustles on the workbench when air moves through a narrow vent. Beyond the foundation, rainwater trickles through the soil, joining the quiet sounds beneath the house. Stanford now understands that the portal must be kept from misuse. You stand in the doorway of the laboratory while he examines the frame, its surface marked by repeated tests and long hours of repair. Fiddleford has warned him that the machinery is becoming too powerful to control easily, and Stanford has begun to agree. He thinks of the first journal hidden far away, of the other journal still connected to the secret, and of the information that could bring the portal to life. He trusts Stanley with a duty that Stanford cannot perform alone. Their agreement is fragile, because Stanley understands the request as a sign of exclusion rather than confidence. Cold stone rises around the laboratory, holding the day's dampness in its rough surface. Fine grit gathers in the corners where the walls meet the floor, and small metal filings catch the light from a shaded lamp. The portal's frame stands motionless, large enough to dominate the room even when unpowered. Around it, the machinery gives off a low vibration, more felt than heard. A warm trace of oil rests on the air, joined by the bitter smell of electrical heat from the power unit. You touch the edge of a cabinet and find the wood smooth from repeated use. Above, a floorboard complains under an unseen step. Then the house returns to silence. Stanley and Stanford reunite at Stanford's home before the final rupture. You are standing with them in the upper rooms, where the house has already begun to resemble a laboratory despite its domestic furniture. Instruments occupy shelves that once held books, wires pass beneath rugs, and the floorboards conceal machinery designed to open a passage between dimensions. Stanford has kept working, while Stanley has carried the burden of the hidden journal and the secret. Their meeting begins with familiar voices and old habits, but the conversation soon turns towards the book. Stanford wants the journal returned or secured more carefully. Stanley wants an explanation for the years of secrecy, the danger, and the distance that has grown between them. The house is close and airless around the brothers, with dust resting on the window ledges and the scent of oil rising from below. A lamp throws a yellow pool across the table, while blue-white light flickers faintly through the cracks in the floorboards. The hidden room is not visible, yet its presence is unmistakable in the low vibration beneath your feet. Electrical heat seeps upwards through the timber, warming the air beside the table. A chair scrapes across the floor, and the sound travels into the rooms beyond. Outside, the night presses against the windows in dark layers, while the laboratory below gathers energy without anyone above fully noticing. Stanley brings the first journal into the argument, and Stanford reaches for it with sudden urgency. You stand between the brothers as their anger collides with Stanford's fear of misuse. Stanford insists that the book contains instructions capable of operating the portal, while Stanley accuses him of trusting machines more than family. The argument becomes sharper, although neither brother intends to begin the final chain of events. Their hands close around the book at the same moment. A tug pulls the cover open, and several pages slide across the table. Beneath the house, a switch responds to the movement, current passes through the machinery, and the hidden portal begins to activate. The floorboards shiver with a force that makes dust rise in narrow columns. Blue-white light gathers around the machinery beneath the house, first as a weak halo, and then as a widening radiance beneath the cracks. The smell of electrical heat fills the upper room, covering the older scents of paper, timber, and oil. A low vibration deepens until it can be felt in your chest. The lamp flickers, throwing the brothers' shadows across the walls in uneven shapes. Below you, metal locks engage one after another, and the portal frame begins to turn with slow, immense weight. The house seems to draw breath around the hidden laboratory, while the journal remains caught between Stanford's hands and Stanley's grip. The brothers struggle over the book as the portal opens beneath them. You feel the room tilt in the strange pressure created by the machinery, though the floor remains level beneath your feet. Stanford reaches towards the journal, understanding that its instructions must not be lost or misused. Stanley holds on, still angry at being excluded and unable to see why the secret has become more important than their relationship. Their struggle over the book begins the chain of events that separates them. The opening widens below the house, and the energy Stanford once hoped to study becomes a force neither brother can stop. Stanford's fear arrives too late to prevent the accident. Blue-white light spills through every gap in the floorboards, turning dust into slow-moving sparks. The machinery below gives off a deep vibration, while smaller components click and rattle beneath the strain. Oil warms on the belts and gears, releasing a heavy smell into the house. Electrical heat dries the air around your face, and the timber beneath your hands feels faintly alive with movement. Shadows bend towards the light from the hidden room, stretching across walls, doors, and the open pages of the journal. A cold draft rises from below, carrying the scent of stone and damp earth. The house is no longer simply a home above a laboratory, but a narrow shelter beside an opening to somewhere unknown. Stanford understands that the portal has been activated during the argument, yet understanding does not give him control. You watch him reach for the power controls while Stanley remains near the journal, caught between alarm and resentment. The portal's fuel continues to feed the frame, and the opening grows brighter beneath the house. Stanford tries to shut the machinery down, but the sequence has already moved beyond the arrangement he designed. The first journal lies open, displaying symbols that describe the operation, but offer no simple reversal. His theory about gravity fall's dimensional source has led directly to a threshold that may admit more than knowledge. Bill Cipher's danger stands at the edge of the event, still not fully understood. A wind moves through the house without entering from any window. It travels upwards from the hidden room, stirring loose papers and lifting the edges of the journal. The blue-white brightness below has become almost colorless, washing the furniture in a thin, unreal glow. Dust drifts through the air like pale ash, and the smell of oil remains thick around the machinery. The low vibration shakes the table, the walls, and the boards beneath your shoes. Somewhere beneath the floor, a metal brace gives a long, strained groan. The scent of electrical heat recedes beneath something colder and more distant, a presence that seems to belong neither to the house nor to the forest. The final rupture comes as Stanford attempts to protect the journal and shut down the portal at the same time. You see the brothers pulled apart by the force rising from the laboratory, with Stanford reaching towards the controls and Stanley clutching the book. The opening becomes a bright circular absence beneath the house, and the machinery turns with relentless precision. Stanford's work has created the doorway he sought, but the doorway now determines the movement of everyone near it. The first journal remains the link between the experiment and the secret, carrying the information required to operate the portal while marking the moment when the brothers' lives divide. Stanford disappears through the portal before the room can settle. For a brief moment, the house holds only light and vibration. Then the blue-white glow contracts below the creaking floorboards, and the machinery falls into uneven silence. Dust settles across the table, covering the journal's open pages with a thin veil. Oil drips from a cooling gear, one drop at a time, onto the stone beneath the frame. The smell of electrical heat fades slowly, leaving damp timber and old paper in its place. A cold current moves through the room where Stanford had stood. Stanley remains beside the table, surrounded by the silence of Stanford's home and the knowledge of what has happened beneath it. The portal is closed, but the house still remembers its passage. The incident is shown in A Tale of Two Stans, which aired on 13 July 2015 and brought the brothers' history together through memories preserved in the journals. You remain inside Stanford's home after the rupture, with the first journal no longer safely hidden and the portal concealed in the laboratory beneath the house. The project began with a theory about the dimensional source of gravity fall's weirdness, then grew through Stanford's calculations and Fiddleford's assistance into an opening that could not be treated as ordinary machinery. Stanford had asked Stanley to conceal the journal, protect the book, and guard the secret. The request survived the argument, but the brothers did not remain together. Night gathers beyond the windows, softening the outlines of the house and the trees. The hidden room below the creaking floorboards cools in darkness, its metal surfaces losing the last traces of blue-white light. Dust settles over cables, benches, and the portal frame, while the faint smell of oil remains in the corners. Electrical heat lingers only as a memory in the dry air. Beneath the quiet, a low vibration continues for a little while, then weakens until the building becomes still. The journal lies near the table, its pages marked with warnings, measurements, and instructions that have already changed the course of gravity falls. Above the silent laboratory, the empty house waits through the long night, holding a secret too large for any single room. The house waits through the long night, holding a secret too large for any single room. You remain beside the table, listening for a sound that cannot come. Your brother, Stanford, has vanished through the dimensional gateway, leaving only pale afterlight across the laboratory walls. The air carries the sharp scent of heated metal, though every instrument has fallen silent. You reach towards the place where his hand disappeared, and your fingers meet nothing but coldness. No answer rises from the machinery, and no familiar voice returns through the darkness. Stanford is gone, and you do not know whether he is alive or dead. The first journal rests near your boots, its cover dulled by dust and reflected light. Before the gateway swallowed him, Stanford threw that journal towards you with desperate strength. You caught it against your chest, holding the last object your brother had chosen to place in your hands. Outside, gravity falls lies beneath a sky, slowly paling above the dark trees. Warm summer air moves through the roadside rooms, entering through cracked windows and carrying the faint perfume of pine, old paint, and distant earth. Dusty taxidermy watches from the walls, its glass eyes dim beneath a film of age. Faded painted wood surrounds the silent laboratory, and every board seems to remember the disturbance below. The sign above the shack is not yet lit, but darkness already gathers where its glow will later shine. Along the empty road, insects murmur among the grasses while a loose shutter taps gently against the house. The sound continues with patient irregularity, as though the building is measuring time. Beneath the floorboards, the buried machinery cools in stages, leaving a metallic tang in the stillness. You stay in the laboratory because leaving would make the disappearance final. Stanford's notes cover the walls, and his handwriting leads you through measurements, diagrams, warnings, and unfinished calculations. Every page offers a possible explanation, yet none can tell you where the gateway opened. You examine the coils until your eyes ache, then check the cables again, searching for a fault that might reveal a path. The portal has shut down after its available fuel was depleted, and its great ring stands as useless metal. You understand that the machine may never open again, but you refuse to accept that conclusion. Stanford may be somewhere beyond the ordinary world, waiting beside another machine and expecting you to find him. The empty laboratory becomes a place of waiting and repair, while the first journal becomes your quiet companion. Morning light settles over the house in thin, dusty layers, touching the cabinets and scattered tools. The floorboards retain the warmth of the previous day, although the laboratory itself feels colder than any room above it. A bead of oil glistens beside a wrench, catching the pale window light before sinking into the grain. Spiderwebs tremble whenever wind passes through the upper rooms, and small particles drift slowly through the sunbeams. From the road comes the distant rumble of a delivery truck, followed by birdsong rising from the forest. The house has not changed its shape, yet its meaning has altered completely. Each staircase now leads towards a hidden absence, and each wall encloses an unfinished search. Quiet settles around the journals as the town begins another ordinary day. You begin by repairing what can be repaired, because broken machinery gives your hands something to do. The portal requires parts, money, patience, and a place where curious eyes cannot follow. Stanford's house stands above the buried apparatus, and its rooms offer both shelter and concealment. You study his papers until you can imitate his careful posture, measured speech, and habit of correcting every detail. At first, the performance feels like theft, but the town knows Stanford as the brilliant scientist who built the house. You begin using his identity because his name opens doors that yours cannot open. Your own identity remains hidden from the people around you, sealed behind false explanations and a borrowed signature. Each morning, you answer to Stanford, while your vanished brother remains present in every room. Sunlight warms the roadside walls, drawing the smell of dry timber from the faded painted wood. The house carries small signs of neglect, including cracked varnish, loose nails, and pale marks where pictures once hung. Dusty taxidermy occupies corners beneath sheets of cobweb, while antlers cast delicate shadows across the floor. The windows admit the green fragrance of summer mixed with the dusty sweetness of old curtains. A fly circles the empty laboratory lamp, striking the glass with soft persistence. Somewhere beneath the foundations, metal expands as the temperature rises, producing faint clicks in the buried structure. Those sounds have no pattern you can trust, yet they keep the hidden machine connected to the world above. In the distance, a vehicle slows on the road before disappearing beyond the trees. You sell objects from the house to gather money, beginning with curiosities Stanford once collected for study. Visitors arrive to see strange bones, unusual instruments, and the rooms where the famous researcher supposedly lived. You learn to smile as Stanford, tell stories as Stanford, and accept questions meant for Stanford. The work pays for wire, fuel, tools, and components that ordinary wages could never provide. Gradually, the house becomes a tourist attraction shaped around the expectations of strangers. You place supernatural displays and attractions around the building, giving each one a name convincing enough to survive inspection. The public business becomes the Mystery Shack, although the name begins as little more than painted lettering. Beneath the jokes and souvenirs, your private work continues in darkness. The first coins clatter into an old cash register, each striking the metal drawer with a different note. Warm air moves through the roadside rooms, lifting the corners of handwritten signs and stirring dust beneath the counters. Once evening arrives, the newly installed sign casts a tired red glow across the entrance. Faded painted wood catches the color unevenly, revealing scratches made by weather, customers, and years of hurried repairs. A stuffed animal leans above a display case, its fur softened by dust and handling. Outside, tires hiss over the road before the sound fades into the deeper breathing of the forest. Inside, the building smells of pine boards, old cloth, candle wax, and faintly scorched electrical insulation. The mystery shack settles into its public shape while the hidden rooms remain untouched. You perform Stanford's identity every day, even when no visitor stands nearby. His name appears on receipts, permits, letters, and business documents, while your own name disappears from the visible life of the house. At times, a reflection catches you before the performance is ready, showing the exhaustion beneath the borrowed expression. You practice Stanford's handwriting until the letters look sufficiently familiar, then return to the basement with another box of parts. The portal remains hidden beneath the mystery shack, surrounded by walls that tourists never imagine. Above it, you sell impossible creatures and improbable stories, allowing laughter to cover the sound of drills. Every successful day brings a little money and a little concealment. Every unsuccessful night reminds you that Stanford remains beyond the gateway. Rain passes over Gravity Falls during one autumn afternoon, darkening the painted boards and cooling the air beneath the eaves. Water gathers along the windows, turning the forest into a wavering pattern of black trunks and silver branches. The sign flickers through the downpour, reflected in shallow puddles beside the entrance. Inside, damp coats release the smell of wool and rainwater, while dusty taxidermy appears darker under the weak lamps. The old cash register accepts coins with clattering reluctance, its drawer sticking before closing again. A child presses a palm against the glass of a display case, leaving a clear mark through the condensation. Beyond that small handprint, the shop remains full of shadows, labels, ropes, jars, and quiet mechanisms. You improve the attractions whenever the business needs another reason for visitors to stop. A preserved creature receives a new story, a cabinet gains hidden lights, and a harmless device becomes evidence of the supernatural. The mystery shack grows around the buried machinery like a wooden shell, its rooms extending wherever profit and concealment require. You make the public rooms bright enough to distract from locked doors and heavy carpets. Behind those carpets and beneath those doors, the search continues with patient severity. You compare Stanford's notes against each failed attempt, marking new measurements beside old warnings. The portal's available fuel has long since been exhausted, but you keep collecting materials for another activation. Money from the attraction becomes electricity, metal, paper, and time. The business survives because the investigation depends upon it. Winter makes the roadside rooms quieter, with fewer visitors and longer intervals between passing cars. Cold enters through the seams of the faded painted wood, settling over counters and display cases like a second layer of dust. The taxidermy holds its rigid poses beneath white window light, while frost draws delicate patterns across the glass. The sign's electrical hum seems unusually loud in the frozen evening. Coins enter the old register only occasionally, and each payment sounds isolated within the broad silence. The forest beyond the road absorbs footsteps, leaving the crunch of snow as the clearest sound outside. In the hidden basement, the air tastes of iron and dry stone. A work lamp burns over the portal frame, making the machinery appear almost awake. You spend decades attempting to reactivate the portal, measuring each component and replacing each weakness. Years pass through the mystery shack in layers of repainting, new shelves, altered displays, and increasingly familiar stories. Your voice changes slowly, your shoulders stiffen, and the borrowed identity becomes easier for strangers to accept. Stanford's name remains on the sign of your life, while your own history sinks beneath practical lies. You tell people that Stanford is traveling, studying, or unavailable, depending upon what the moment requires. None of these explanations brings him closer, but each one protects the secret below. You continue searching for a way to recover your brother, even when hope becomes indistinguishable from habit. The portal remains closed, and Stanford remains absent. Summer returns with generous warmth that enters every room through open windows and loose doors. The roadside rooms smell of sun-heated timber, dusty fabric, pine needles, and the faint sweetness of old paper. Cicadas sing from the trees around the steady hum of the sign. Painted boards fade further beneath the bright sky, their reds and yellows softening into the colors of dry leaves. Dusty taxidermy gathers a fine gray coating across its backs, while visitors brush against the displays without noticing. Coins clatter into the old cash register whenever a family leaves with a souvenir or photograph. Warm air moves around the hanging signs, making them creak gently above the floor. Beneath everything, the basement keeps its cooler breath. You arrange the souvenirs carefully because ordinary objects make the extraordinary machinery easier to hide. Mugs, postcards, rubber creatures, and jars of invented specimens fill the public counters above the hidden laboratory. Carpets cover access points, shelves conceal switches, and display cases stand where a stranger might otherwise see a seam. The search continues beneath jokes, carpets, and tourist souvenirs, always close to your hands. You sleep in the house because the portal might require attention at any hour. When the business closes, you count the day's coins, record the expenses, and descend beneath the building. There, the mystery shack becomes quiet enough for you to hear every relay and cooling fan. You work until exhaustion overtakes fear, then wake before dawn with Stanford's name already waiting. A dry wind moves along the road, carrying powdered earth against the lower boards of the shack. The entrance sign groans on its hinges, leaving a faint electrical taste in the air above it. Inside, the displays smell of varnish, old fur, dust, and sun-warmed rope. One stuffed animal has lost an eye, while another carries a thin layer of cobweb across its open mouth. The cash register rests beneath a counter scarred by decades of elbows and shopping bags. Coins lie in small dull heaps beside handwritten price tags, catching the amber light from a shaded lamp. Through the open doorway, summer air shifts the curtains and brings the distant sound of a logging truck. The building appears careless and theatrical, though every room serves the quiet purpose of concealment. You maintain Stanford's public reputation because it protects the machines and preserves the possibility of his return. The townspeople remember him as a strange but capable scientist, and you allow that memory to remain undisturbed. Questions about your family become difficult moments, answered with a lowered voice or an invented errand. You hide your own identity from the people around you, not because the truth has vanished, but because it remains dangerous. If anyone understands that Stanford disappeared and Stanley stayed, the house may lose its protection. So you become Stanford more completely with each passing year. The borrowed identity shapes your clothing, your manner, your business, and the stories repeated across the counter. Beneath that performance, Stanley continues to wait. Evening descends through the trees, leaving the roadside rooms filled with brown light and long, quiet shadows. The faded painted wood seems softer after sunset, while dusty taxidermy loses its theatrical expression and becomes merely old. The sign marks the building against the dark road, humming steadily above the insects. Summer air moves through the open windows, carrying the resinous scent of pine and the mineral smell of cooling dust. The register gives a final clatter when the last visitor pays, then rests with its drawer half closed. Floorboards answer each footstep with familiar creaks. Somewhere below, the portal's metal frame holds the day's heat, waiting beneath layers of carpet, timber, and silence. You continue improving the portal even after repeated failures make the work appear unreasonable to anyone outside the house. New calculations occupy the margins of Stanford's journal, and new components gather in crates beneath the public displays. You learn which generators can be repaired, which materials can be salvaged, and which suppliers ask too many questions. The Mystery Shack pays for each experiment, its strange attractions, turning private grief into a modest income. Visitors laugh at the displays, bargain over souvenirs, and leave believing that the building's secrets are harmless. You let them believe it because their money carries the search forward. Decade after decade, the portal remains hidden beneath the Mystery Shack, while Stanford's absence remains unresolved. A thin layer of dust settles over the basement stairs, though the upper rooms remain busy with footsteps and conversation. The scent below is different from the shops, carrying cold stone, machine oil, copper, and the dry bitterness of old insulation. Above, the sign sends a muted vibration through the ceiling. The cash register clatters occasionally as a late visitor purchases a trinket, and the sound travels downward through the beams. Warm summer air cannot reach the deepest chamber, where the portal stands surrounded by cables. The walls bear faint pencil marks recording earlier attempts, and the floor contains scratches from equipment moved in darkness. Nothing looks ready, yet nothing has been abandoned. You become accustomed to living beside an impossible absence. Stanford's face appears in old photographs. His handwriting fills the journals, and his identity remains attached to the business. Your own name survives only in memories you refuse to share and in the private shape of your grief. The house grows older, while you keep the same public story alive through careful repetition. You tell visitors that the Mystery Shack belongs to Stanford Pines, and the statement gradually becomes ordinary. Still, each night brings you back to the hidden portal and the first journal. You reach again for the brother who vanished into white light, though the gesture now happens inwardly. No answer arrives from the gateway, but the search does not end. Morning returns with pale warmth across the shop windows and a thin shimmer over the road. Sunlight reveals fingerprints on the glass, scratches in the counter, and small tufts of dust caught beneath the taxidermy. The sign fades beneath the brighter sky, although its hum continues faintly. Summer air moves through the roadside rooms, stirring a curtain that has been repaired many times. Coins clatter into the old cash register as the first visitors arrive, bringing voices into the once empty house. Faded painted wood holds the smell of sun and rain together, while the forest gives off green and resinous breath. Beneath the floor, the machinery remains hidden. Above it, the attraction begins another ordinary day. You keep the portal concealed behind the life of the Mystery Shack, allowing the public rooms to become a curtain of harmless absurdity. The displays grow more elaborate, the souvenirs more numerous, and the stories more polished with each season. Your impersonation of Stanford is eventually discovered by Dipper and Mabel, though the truth reaches them in stages. The revelations belong to Not What He Seems, aired on 9 March 2015, and A Tale of Two Stans, aired on 13 July 2015. In those accounts, the hidden history of Stanley and Stanford becomes visible at last. Until that discovery, you remain divided between the name above the shop and the brother beneath every decision. The business carries on, the portal waits, and the first journal stays close to your work. At dusk, the Mystery Shack settles into a familiar arrangement of dim corners, worn boards, and softly glowing signs. Color trembles across the entrance whenever the current falters. Dusty taxidermy rests beneath faded painted wood, and the air retains the warm, dry smell of a long summer day. The old cash register gives a final clatter before the drawer closes with a tired metallic click. Outside, insects pulse among the grasses, while the road becomes empty beneath the deepening blue. Inside, carpets lie flat over the hidden entrances, and souvenirs gather shadows along their edges. The public house appears finished for the night. Beneath it, the private work remains awake. You descend once more, carrying the first journal beneath your arm and a lamp in your other hand. The portal stands in the darkness, enormous and patient, surrounded by evidence of decades spent trying to bring Stanford home. You place the journal beside the controls, then study the diagrams beneath the yellow circle of light. The gateway does not open, and the depleted fuel remains beyond replacement. Still, you check every connection, tighten every fitting, and record every result with careful patience. Stanley remains in Gravity Falls because Stanford is somewhere beyond it, alive or dead, and the uncertainty has become your permanent companion. Above you, the mystery shack waits beside the road. Below you, the search continues in silence. The years gather around you without making a sound, measured by the changing paint upon the mystery shack and the steady return of summer to Gravity Falls. Stanley remains beneath that familiar roof, presenting himself to visitors as the same peculiar proprietor, while the name Stanford Pines rests in silence behind his teeth. For approximately 30 years, within the old family story, you keep Stanford's identity secret from nearly everyone who might ask. The mystery shack remains your public home throughout that long period, crowded with souvenirs, tourists, dust, and the practical disguises of ordinary business. Behind the walls, however, another life continues through hidden calculations, sealed doors, and the patient repair of machinery that has already failed you many times. You work quietly to restart the portal because Stanford is somewhere beyond it, and because the unanswered past has never loosened its hold upon your hands. Summer night settles over the clearing with a darkness softened by the warmth still held in the timber. Crickets call from the grass in uneven waves, their small voices surrounding the shack without disturbing its deeper silence. A faint breeze moves through the pines, carrying the dry scent of needles, warm earth, and old boards that have absorbed many seasons. Beneath the floor, the laboratory keeps a different temperature, cool against your wrists and still beneath your collar. Forgotten machinery occupies the shadows in heavy shapes, its metal surfaces powdered with coal dust. When a loose chain shifts somewhere beyond the lamp, the sound travels through the room as a delicate tremor. Above, the building gives a quiet creak, as though the mystery shack is settling more comfortably into the night. The laboratory light rests upon diagrams, tools, and fingerprints, turning every object into part of a patient, unfinished arrangement. The hidden journal brings the old family story into the children's summer, although neither Dipper nor Mabel understands at first how deeply the discovery reaches. Dipper discovers the third journal during the summer of 2012, finding it among the strange evidence that has begun to make Gravity Falls feel less like a holiday town and more like a locked cabinet. The author is eventually revealed to be Stanford Pines, the brother whose existence Stan has concealed for approximately 30 years. You watch the children become involved in the mystery surrounding Stan, first through curiosity, then through loyalty, and finally through the danger gathering around the hidden room. Their questions move through the shack like a draft beneath a closed door. Every answer leads towards the same absent figure, Stanford Pines, while Stanley's public identity begins to lose the protection of its familiar shape. Moonlight lies across the forest in narrow silver fragments, broken by branches and trembling leaves. Around the porch, the night remains crowded with crickets, while a moth circles the yellow bulb beside the entrance. The wooden steps hold the warmth of the day beneath their rough surfaces, although the air has begun to cool around your ankles. Somewhere near the water tower, a frog gives a single hollow note and then disappears into the thicker chorus of insects. The smell of pine resin lingers along the path, mixed with faint engine oil from the shed and the sweet remains of fruit left in a kitchen bowl. Through one window, the interior appears almost peaceful, with curtains hanging motionless and chairs standing in their usual places. Yet the boards remember every hurried footstep, and the walls conceal the machinery beneath them, waiting in darkness for the next attempt. The children's discovery changes the balance inside the house, because the third journal does not merely describe creatures or explain the town's unusual geography. It gives a name to the absent author and places that name beside the secret Stan has guarded for decades. Dipper studies the pages with the serious attention of someone following a map, while Mabel brings warmth and concern into rooms shaped by suspicion. You remain close to them, protecting the cover that has allowed you to survive, even as it begins to collapse in front of the people you love. The Mystery Shack has been your public home since the earlier years, yet it now feels like both shelter and evidence. Each concealed door becomes a question, each locked drawer an accusation, and the name Stanford Pines grows heavier whenever it appears upon the page. The old family story has entered the children's summer and will not be returned to darkness. A warmer wind passes through the trees, stirring the curtains inside the shack and raising small clouds of dust along the veranda. The boards beneath your shoes are uneven from years of use, with splinters polished smooth by countless footsteps. From the kitchen comes the faint scent of coffee, old paper, and the mineral smell of water standing in a metal sink. A clock marks the hour with muted movement rather than a clear chime, its mechanism tired but dependable. In the distance, a truck travels along the road, and its sound fades gradually between the trunks. When the vehicle has vanished, the crickets seem louder, surrounding the building with a restless, living texture. The darkness beyond the porch is not empty, because the forest contains mice in the undergrowth, wings above the roof, and leaves rubbing together where the air moves gently through the branches. The investigation becomes more dangerous when government agents arrive in Gravity Falls and begin examining the strange circumstances surrounding Stan. In Not What He Seems, the agents investigate him with the professional caution of people accustomed to finding explanations beneath unusual appearances. Their records identify you as Stanford Pines, and the false identity you have carried for approximately 30 years begins to collapse in front of Dipper and Mabel. The discovery is painful because the children do not merely learn that you have lied. They learn that every room, every story, and every absent answer has been arranged around a brother whose name was never meant to be spoken. Not What He Seems is the 11th episode of the second season, first aired on 9 March 2015. Within that hour, the Mystery Shack becomes a place of interrogation, fear, and old machinery approaching its final test. The laboratory grows colder as the hidden systems awaken beneath the floor. Fine dust lifts from forgotten machinery and drifts through the beam of the lamp, revealing slow currents in the sealed air. Copper pipes hold a dull brown sheen, while their joints gather pale deposits from years of neglect. The smell of heated metal begins beneath the older scents of timber and oil, faint at first, then sharp enough to touch the back of your throat. A relay clicks behind the wall, pauses, and answers itself with another small metallic sound. On the floor, the yellow circle of light lies across diagrams whose ink has faded unevenly at the edges. Wires cross the concrete like dark roots, leading towards the concealed architecture beneath the shack. Outside, summer night continues with its crowded crickets, unaware that a chamber below the house is preparing to open a passage through distance, time, and memory. The portal is activated using the journals and the hidden machinery, with each part of the arrangement answering a problem that has resisted you for decades. Dipper's knowledge, the journal's instructions, and the machinery concealed beneath the mystery shack finally meet within one dangerous sequence. You stand among the controls while the children remain close enough to understand the cost and too close to remain safe. The portal begins as a vibration beneath your feet, then becomes a widening field of light that erases the shadows from the laboratory walls. The white glare crosses the floor, washes over the instruments, and throws every suspended particle into sharp relief. Stanley has tried to restart the portal in secret for years, but the attempt now belongs to the entire family. The old machine does not distinguish between guilt and hope, and its rising hum makes both feelings seem equally unavoidable. White light floods the laboratory without warmth, making the metal framework appear almost weightless against the walls. The glare reaches beneath tables, along the edges of cabinets, and into the cracks where cold dust has collected undisturbed. For a moment, every surface shines with the clean severity of winter, although summer remains pressed against the doors outside. The air trembles with a deep electrical pressure that settles upon your skin like a storm waiting overhead. Crickets continue in the clearing, their distant rhythm strangely calm beside the portal's growing roar. Glass rattles inside a cabinet, and a loose screw travels a few inches across the floor before stopping against a seam. The room smells of ozone, scorched insulation, and ancient dust lifted from machinery that has waited through 30 years of silence. No shadow remains beneath the yellow circle, because the portal's white glare has reached every corner of the laboratory. At the end of Not What He Seems, Stanford returns through the portal and steps back into the mystery shack. His arrival is not a simple rescue, because the man who emerges carries the years beyond the gateway upon his clothes, his face, and his guarded movements. You see Stanford Pines again after approximately 30 years of secrecy, although the reunion begins under the pressure of danger rather than the ease of recognition. Dipper and Mabel witness the truth in its most physical form, with the missing brother standing before them where the false brother has always worked. The episode ends with the revelation that Stan has concealed his brother's existence, and the secret changes the meaning of the entire house. The portal has opened, Ford has returned, and the old family wound has been placed in the center of the room where everyone must now live with it. The first moments after the portal closes are filled with small sounds that seem too ordinary for what has happened. A cooling pipe ticks behind the machinery, while dust settles upon the concrete in soft, irregular patterns. The laboratory floor retains a pale brightness from the vanished gateway, and the edges of the room look blurred beneath the last afterimage. Stanford's coat carries the scent of distant metal, cold stone, and air that has not moved through an ordinary world. Your own hands remain marked with grease around the knuckles, and the rough controls feel strangely familiar after their long resistance. From above, the shack answers the disturbance with a slow creak through its beams. The danger has passed for the moment, but the building does not become peaceful at once. Its timber holds the memory of the portal's glare, the cold dust, and the footsteps of two brothers standing together again. The reunion cannot restore the years that have gone missing, because time has changed both brothers in different directions. You have spent approximately 30 years maintaining a public life beneath the name Stanford Pines, while Stanford has endured the consequences of the portal and whatever lies beyond it. The old argument remains between you, not as a single sentence, but as a room filled with unfinished meanings. A tale of two Stans presents the brothers' history in flashback, tracing their childhood bond, shared ambitions, and growing differences. The past shows how easily loyalty can become resentment when one brother receives recognition and the other receives blame. You remember the argument that separated you, the accusation that followed, and the instant when pride closed a door that neither brother knew how to reopen. Ford has returned to the shack, but innocence has not returned with him. Morning approaches slowly through the trees, leaving the laboratory's darkness pale around the windows. Moisture gathers on the outer boards, and the scent of wet soil begins to replace the dryness of the previous night. The crickets thin their chorus as birds test a few uncertain notes from the deeper forest. Inside, the floor remains gritty beneath your shoes, carrying the fine residue shaken loose from forgotten machinery. A metal panel cools with occasional clicks, each one smaller than the last. The portal's white glare is gone, yet your eyes still remember its shape whenever you look towards the empty space. Stanford stands somewhere nearby, and the knowledge of his presence changes the air more completely than the machine did. Above the laboratory, the mystery shack waits in the first grey light, its crooked roof and tired windows holding the old wound beneath an ordinary morning. Forgiveness begins without a grand declaration, because both brothers are too familiar with the weight of dramatic promises. It appears instead in a decision to remain in the same room, in a glance that lasts longer than anger, and in the willingness to hear an old explanation. You and Stanford confront the memory of the argument that separated you, returning to its details with the caution of people handling cracked glass. The blame does not disappear, and neither brother becomes innocent through the simple fact of reunion. Yet the conversation allows the past to become something shared rather than something secretly carried by one person. The hidden journal, the portal, and the 30 years of concealment all stand behind you as evidence of damage. Forgiveness offers a way forward, though it cannot make the damaged years appear unused or return Stanford to the day before he vanished. Afternoon light enters the shack in long bands, touching the worn floorboards and faded displays arranged for visitors. Dust moves through the brightness in slow spirals, stirred by footsteps from the rooms below and by air slipping beneath the doors. The scent of pine is stronger now, warmed by the sun upon the outer walls. A fan turns with a gentle imbalance, producing a soft, rhythmic murmur beneath the voices in the house. The kitchen table bears small scratches, dark rings, and one shallow mark from an object dropped many seasons ago. Beyond the windows, insects move among the weeds, and a woodpecker taps at a distant trunk with patient regularity. The building seems to breathe through its joints. After the portal, the agents, and the secret spoken aloud, the mystery shack remains standing, though every familiar surface now carries a different meaning. Stanford's return does not end the strange events surrounding Gravity Falls, because the town has been altered by the opening between worlds. The brothers must live with the damage caused by decades of secrecy, while greater dangers gather beyond the ordinary boundaries of the forest. You continue to see the consequences in the children's uncertainty, the questions that cannot be answered quickly, and the strained movements of two men learning how to share a home again. Dipper and Mabel are no longer merely visitors to Stan's private mystery. Their involvement has made them part of the family history, with its lost brother, concealed name, and dangerous machinery. The portal has given Stanford a path back to the shack, but it has also opened old responsibilities that cannot be abandoned. Every repaired wall and closed cabinet carries the knowledge that the family's future must be built beside the evidence of its past. Towards evening, the roof takes on a copper color beneath the lowering sun, and the windows reflect the surrounding pines in broken rectangles. Warm boards release the smell of resin as the day cools, while the grass along the road becomes dark with shadow. A kettle begins to murmur somewhere inside, its small domestic sound nearly hidden by the insects outside. The porch rail is rough beneath your palm, carrying grains of dust that catch against the skin. From the forest comes the dry movement of a squirrel, followed by a brief silence and the distant flutter of wings. The shack sign creaks once above the entrance, then hangs still. In the rooms below, tools rest beside newly examined diagrams, and the old laboratory waits beneath the house, quieter now, but not emptied of consequence. The brothers' history becomes clearer through the flashback, yet clarity does not make it painless. Stanley and Stanford begin as children shaped by the same family, sharing a name, a room, and the restless desire to discover what lies beyond the next boundary. Their lives divide through failure, ambition, and an argument that turns a moment of anger into decades of distance. Stanley adopts the public identity attached to the shack and preserves it with stubborn precision. while Stanford becomes the hidden center of a story told through journals and machinery. Approximately 30 years pass before Stanford Pines can return to Gravity Falls. During those years, the Mystery Shack remains Stanley's public home, the place where he performs certainty for visitors and uncertainty for himself. When Ford finally steps back into the shack, the building receives both the brother who left and the brother who waited. Night gathers once more, but the clearing feels altered by the knowledge inside the house. Crickets fill the warm darkness, their calls rising and falling like a wide, uneven fabric stretched between the trees. The moon appears above the roof with a muted silver edge, and the windows become dark mirrors beneath it. Cool air moves along the porch, brushing your face with the scent of pine bark and distant water. Inside, footsteps cross the upper floor, then pause near a door that has been opened and closed many times. The timber answers with a quiet creak after the danger has passed, a sound so familiar that it almost resembles breathing. Dust remains in the corners, though the laboratory has been cleaned around the machinery. Somewhere below, a single lamp continues to burn, leaving a small amber pool beneath the house. The story moves onwards towards the series finale, Weirdmageddon 3, Take Back the Falls, which first airs on 15 February 2016. By then, the brothers stand together against a danger that makes their earlier conflict seem both smaller and more significant. Their shared history becomes a source of strength because they understand one another's habits, weaknesses, and stubborn forms of courage. The secrecy that once isolated them has not vanished, but its direction has changed. Instead of concealing the past from one another, they begin carrying it openly while protecting the family gathered around them. Dipper and Mabel remain central to the strange household formed inside the Mystery Shack, and Stanford's return gives their summer story an older, deeper shape. The finale places the brothers within a wider struggle, yet the emotional center remains the same: the shack, the lost brother, and the long wait that finally ends. A thin rain begins after midnight, tapping lightly upon the roof and darkening the porch boards. Water gathers along the sign, drops from its lower edge, and breaks apart upon the ground below. The forest smells of wet needles, mud, and stone, while the air inside retains the dry warmth of the rooms. Rain softens the distant road until passing vehicles become low movements rather than distinct sounds. The crickets continue beneath the cover of leaves, their voices muffled but persistent. In the laboratory, a drop travels through an unseen seam and strikes metal at measured intervals. The portal's former white glare has left no visible mark upon the floor, although a faint brightness seems to remain in the polished edges of the controls. The quiet creak of the shack travels through the walls, joining the rain in a patient rhythm that belongs to no single hour. Stanford's return offers forgiveness, but it does not offer a return to innocence. Stanley has to accept that his protective lies wounded those nearest to him, even though they preserve the possibility of reunion. Stanford has to face the consequences of the choices that led him towards the portal and the anger that followed its failure. Neither brother can become the person he was before the argument, yet the family gathers around them within the Mystery Shack, and that gathering gives the old place a new purpose. The site of the wound becomes a place of shared meals, guarded conversations, and watchful companionship. Stanford Pines is no longer only a name in a journal, and Stanley is no longer able to hide behind the public story. Morning returns, with the rain reduced to beads along the railings and silver threads between the branches. The ground gives off a deep, earthy scent, and small pools reflect the grey sky beneath the porch. A sleepy bird shifts somewhere in the roofline, producing a brief rustle among the damp leaves. The kitchen carries the smell of bread, coffee, and timber warmed by the first week light. On the laboratory floor, footprints mark the dust around the machinery, showing where the brothers and the children stood during the portal's opening. The marks overlap without forming a clear pattern, but together they describe a moment when separate lives met again. The controls are silent now, and the hidden room seems smaller without its dangerous radiance. Above it, the mystery shack creaks softly as the building dries, holding its occupants beneath one roof. The old family story has therefore come full circle without becoming simple. Dipper and Mabel become involved in the mystery surrounding Stan, while government agents investigate him in not what he seems. The agents identify Stan under the name Stanford Pines, and the portal is activated using the journals and hidden machinery. Stanford returns through the portal at the episode's end, while the revelation that Stan has concealed his brother's existence changes the meaning of the house. These facts remain within the larger movement of the story, like stones along a path. The names remain, the dates remain, and the family continues. The seasons after the reunion pass through the shack in ordinary details rather than dramatic signs. Sunlight fades from the wallpaper, rain marks the porch, and dust returns to the corners whenever the doors stand open. The machines beneath the house receive attention from careful hands, though some are left untouched because their purpose belongs to an earlier danger. At night, crickets crowd the clearing again, and their voices surround the building with the same summer abundance that existed before the secret was exposed. A cup rests beside another cup upon the table, and two sets of footsteps cross the upper boards at different hours. The quiet creak of the shack after danger has passed becomes part of the household's language. It no longer sounds like a warning from the old wound. It sounds like timber enduring weather, weight, memory, and the continued presence of those who have chosen to remain. You stand beneath the familiar roof with Stanford nearby, and the distance between the brothers has become something that can be crossed slowly. The portal once offered a violent passage through absence, but reconciliation proceeds through smaller movements, measured in shared work and unguarded pauses. The children's summer has changed the family because the hidden journal brought the past into their hands before anyone was ready to explain it. Their involvement also gives the brothers a reason to speak plainly, since Dipper and Mabel have witnessed the cost of silence. Stanley keeps parts of his old manor, Stanford keeps parts of his reserve, and neither man loses the scars formed by years apart. Forgiveness is present in the household, though it lives beside regret rather than replacing it. The mystery shack gathers them again around the old machinery, the old name, and the ordinary hope of another morning. Outside, the final darkness thins above the pines, leaving a cool blue line along the eastern sky. The grass is wet, and each blade holds a bead of water that trembles when the breeze reaches it. Crickets give their last scattered calls before the birds begin, and the clearing changes from one kind of quiet to another. The walls of the shack carry the scent of rain-soaked wood, dust, and the faint warmth of rooms where people have slept. Beneath the floor, forgotten machinery rests beneath a skin of pale powder, no longer waiting for a brother to return. The portal's white glare belongs to the past now, remembered in the eyes of those who stood upon the laboratory floor. Above, the building gives one long, gentle creak, and then settles into the morning. For approximately 30 years, Stanley has kept Stanford's identity secret, while the mystery shack remained his public home. During that time, the hidden brother became a journal, a machinery problem, a name carried through locked rooms, and a reason to continue searching. In the summer of 2012, Dipper discovers the third journal, and the old story enters the lives of Dipper and Mabel. In 2015, Not What He Seems, the 11th episode of the second season, first airs on 9 March, and its portal brings Stanford Pines back to Gravity Falls. A tale of two Stans then gives the brothers' history its shape through flashback, while the series finale, Weirdmageddon 3, Take Back the Falls, airs on 15 February 2016. The dates remain quiet markers within the tale, and the names remain steady in the mind. Stanford returns. Stanley waits no longer, and the family gathers where the old wound began. The last warmth of night lingers beneath the roof as morning light reaches across the upper rooms. A curtain moves once beside an open window, carrying the scent of wet leaves and distant pine into the hall. The floorboards give soft replies to every careful step, while the house settles around its sleeping occupants. Somewhere below, cold dust rests upon the forgotten machinery, and the laboratory holds the memory of the white glare that once crossed its floor. Outside, the crickets have fallen silent, leaving only birdsong, dripping branches, and the slight movement of air through the clearing. The mystery shack remains crooked, weathered, and full of secrets, yet it is also the place where the family gathers again. Under its roof, two brothers live with the past. The children sleep near the truth, and the long wait for Stanford to return has finally become part of the house's quiet history.